Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic, and let's begin part 9. Kurenai and Anko quickly erased the distance between Guy, Asuma and themselves as they took the moment of distraction and each kicked the two men across their faces. Guy was sent into a burning building and Asuma was kicked into an adjacent building to Guy. Kurenai and Anko smiled at each other before giving each other a wink and waited for their opponents to arrive. No less than 5 minutes did Guy appear first from the building rooftop and gave a grin before wiping the blood from his chin. He had never been kicked so hard in his life. He wasn't sure how strong Tsunade's punches or kicks were, but if they were anything like this then it was something to be feared. Guy jumped off of the roof of the building and landed on the ground before smiling at the two women. That was a nice kick. It's too bad that I have to kill such a youthful opponent, Guy said, and Anko had to give a reply by smiling and raising an eyebrow. Did you say something? Anko asked, making Guy's enormous eyebrows twitch. Guy stuck his finger in her and gritted his teeth. Damn you and your hip attitude. You're just like Kakashi, but even talk. Let's have our youth explode. Guy yelled and ran at Anko. Anko cracked her knuckles and charged at Guy, all the while feeling the bloodlust rush through her veins. Guy and Anko collided and the impact caused a small crater to appear beneath them. Anko had to smile from the contact. Not once was she able to match Guy in power, but now was a different story. Anko and Guy continued their struggle while their chakras flared at each other. Anko, then, shifted her stance and managed to bring her foot around to kick Guy's side, but the Jonin saw it coming and immediately jumped into the air dodging Anko's kick. However, he wasn't done as he brought his own leg to Anko's face. Anko quickly stopped the kick with her right hand and before either could counter, Anko backed up slightly and massaged her neck in a smile. Alright Guy, I'll keep this strictly taijutsu. It'll be more fun that way, Anko said softly and tightened her fist. Guy narrowed his eyes at her before ducking his head and widened his eyes when he saw Anko behind him with a right kick aimed at his skull along with a demonic smile. I didn't even see her move, Guy said to himself, but Anko quickly made her next maneuver and began to spin her body in the air. The result was her slamming her left foot into Guy's face. Kurenai clapped at Anko's fight and was still standing next to the building that Asuma was supposed to be in. She knew he was still in there, probably thinking of a way to fight her, but she was all the more content to wait. Anko chuckled at her hit, but it only spurred Guy on and he did something that she wouldn't have thought that he'd do so early in a fight. Guy sighed and removed his weights, sending them to the ground with a giant crash. Anko suddenly felt a rush of excitement hit her, knowing this would be a good fight. It was all amazing to her that she felt like a snake, waiting for the moment to strike the opponent, keeping them thinking that they could get away, waiting for the perfect time to end it all. It thrilled the snake mistress so much. Guy instantly disappeared from view and before Anko could tell what happened, she was slammed in the stomach by Guy, making her gasp from the hit. But it wasn't done as Guy took his other fist and made it connect to Anko's jaw, making the snake mistress Hanyu fly a couple of feet before backflipping and landing on the ground in a slide. She looked up, but Guy was gone and before long she grabbed a punch from Guy, shocking the Jonin until she huffed. Not bad Guy. That was good, now let me see if I can't do better, Anko stated and slammed Guy in the stomach. Guy widened his eyes at the hit and fell back to the ground, making Anko chuckle, but it turned into an amused grin when she saw a tree log in its place. Guy, you gonna hide from me? Anko asked while the fires raged around Konoha. She and Kurenai knew that they would have to leave soon, but it felt so good to be fighting people who wouldn't bite the dust in one hit. Suddenly the flames intensified in front of Anko and the Jonin. Hanyu had to raise an eyebrow before seeing Guy inside the flames with his right fist back and his left palm open. It was aimed at Anko and the snake woman smirked. Guy's chakra intensified, making the fires swirl around every area except on him. Hi no hoko, roar of the fire, Guy yelled out as he extended his fist, sending a spiraling blaze of chakra towards Anko. To Anko, the fire looked like a spiraling tunnel headed for her, which it was, but she could think about that later. Anko acted fast and quickly dodged the spiraling fire, but when she did, Anko gasped when she saw Guy under her. Guy kicked Anko into the air with his foot and quickly disappeared from under her. Anko had seen this technique multiple times and it made her tingle that Guy was trying it on her. She always wanted to be in one, but Guy told her it was dangerous, so she let it go, but now it was very much different. She was gonna experience it for the first time. Guy appeared underneath Anko and his quickly grabbed her arms and held on tight. It ends now. Goodbye, Guy said to Anko as they both spiraled into the ground. Omid Renge, primary lotus, Guy yelled out as he slammed Anko's head into the ground. Kurenai widened her eyes at the sight, but her shock was interrupted when she heard the sound of knives hitting each other. The Genjutsu mistress gave a small smirk before turning around to the building. Asuma soon emerged for the destroyed establishment with his trench knives, and apparently he was smoking a cigarette in his mouth, which made Kurenai sigh. Some things about people never change. Well, lady, you have a mean left kick, I'll give you that. If I didn't block that kick, it might have dislocated my jaw, Asuma said with a groan. Kurenai gave an innocent smile and simply shrugged her shoulders at his comment. Or I just held back enough to not dislocate your jaw, Kurenai returned, making Asuma narrow his eyes at her. The bearded Jonin sighed before covering his entire trench knives in Fuden chakra. Kurenai, in turn, took out a kunai and shifted into a demon taijutsu stance she remembered Naruto teaching her during some of their free time. Naruto told her that the demon taijutsu stance was about being fierce and vicious in your strikes, similarly to the Inuzuka stance, but this form left no mercy to be desired at all. Kurenai dropped to all fours and her canines started to show in her teeth while her claws sharpened and her chakra grew a bit darker. Asuma nearly choked on the ki that Kurenai was exuding and almost allowed the cigarette to fall from his mouth. Kurenai chuckled at Asuma's expense, but the bearded Jonin didn't back down, and with his Fuden chakra-powered trench knives he turned back to the flaming building behind him and he stuck his trench knives inside. Suddenly and instantly, the trench knives were coated in a massive fire, taking the shape of the very weapons themselves. All right then. I'll show you why Konoha is the strongest of the 5 nations, Asuma said to Kurenai. Kurenai smirked and itched her claws in anticipation. Then show me, Asuma-san, Kurenai said before the two disappeared from view. While Kurenai and Anko were having their fights, Shizune and Tsunade were having their own. Tsunade was huffing from the mock fight and she had to curse that Shizune didn't even look winded in the least. Tsunade then had to thank Kami that she was on their side. Come on, Godime-sama. You said you'd show me your power, Shizune said to her. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched at Shizune's cheekiness in their fight, but with all the Anbu watching them, she knew Shizune had point. All right then. You asked for it, Tsunade said, moving through some hand signs. Shizune recognized them completely from all the years she had been with Tsunade in the past future, and she knew to keep up this fight in front of everyone, Tsunade wouldn't hold her punch anymore. Well, even if she didn't, it wouldn't really do much. Infuen. Kai, reserve seal. Release, Tsunade said as strange purplish markings appeared across her face. Tsunade suddenly overflowed with chakra and it made Shizune slightly chuckle. The brunette decided to get serious and unhinged her fox ears. Everyone felt the chakra increase from Shizune and the two women smiled. Right here, Godime-sama, Shizune said, pointing at her chest. Tsunade raised an eyebrow, but she got the idea and smirked. With a simple twist of her foot, Tsunade disappeared from view, shocking all the Anbu present. However, Shizune was able to follow her movement and she was graced with a strong hit to her stomach courtesy of Tsunade and her fist. Shizune was sent spiraling into a building and the crash made a loud noise for everyone. Soon an Anbu appeared next to Tsunade, deciding to express some concerns. Godime-sama, we have to hurry. The village is in disarray right now. What should we do? The Anbu asked her. Tsunade turned her gaze to see the village fires getting bigger, and it didn't worry her since the place would officially burn in 2 years, but it just wasn't meant to be right now. Tsunade turned back to the Anbu and narrowed her eyes. Then what are you doing over here? I can handle myself just fine, Hawk. Now stop the fires. I'll take care of the intruder, Tsunade told them. Everyone hesitated with her orders before Tsunade slammed the ground with her fist in mock anger. This is an order from your Hokage. Get going. Tsunade yelled and all the Anbu immediately obeyed, then shushined out of sight, wishing their Godime good luck. Tsunade felt all their presences leave and immediately Shizune appeared from the rubble while cleaning some of the dust from her clothes. Wow, you really can be scary when you want, Tsunade-san, Shizune told her. Tsunade brushed her hand through her hair and chuckled. I suppose. So then where are Kushina, Minato, and Fu? The Hokage asked the Hanyu. Shizune allowed her eyes to lock in on the 3 mentioned people, but it was hard with all the screaming and yelling, but it felt good. Real good nonetheless. Suddenly she picked up on them. Apparently Fu decided to raid all the shops for their weapons since good kunai and materials are so hard to come by these days. Well, they really aren't, but Konoha won't be needing them in 2 years, so why not grab some things? So what are they doing? Tsunade asked. Shizune chuckled and turned to Tsunade with a look of humor on her face. Well, apparently, they decided that Konoha has no need for supplies and weapons, so they're raiding the places, Shizune said, and Tsunade had to chuckle at that. Tsunade knew she was going to have mountains of paperwork for all of this, but she honestly didn't mind since Naruto told her the way to do it faster. Well, that's bad for Konoha. I'll be lucky if we don't get attacked while you, Naruto, Jiraiya, and Yugo are gone, Tsunade said. Shizune chuckled with a nod, but then Tsunade turned to her with a look of confusion. Just curiosity, why are you taking Jiraiya and Yugo-san with you? Tsunade asked. Shizune raised an eyebrow and then turned to look at the moon. It seemed magnificent amidst all the fires. It had sort of a weird feeling, but Shizune turned back to Tsunade. Well, we need those too. I'm sure Naruto-kun wants them, especially Yugo, but he might have another reason. We'd have asked you to give us all a 2-year training trip, but then that would be kind of suspicious, Shizune said before Tsunade smiled. It's gonna be destroyed in 2 years as soon as you guys get back, right? Tsunade asked them. Shizune nodded, wondering what Tsunade had in mind. Well, I can have the Namikaze family leave. I'll say it's for a diplomatic mission to Oto. You said Yagura was still over there, so why don't you guys go? I'll handle everything here, Tsunade opted. Shizune raised an eyebrow at Tsunade and then chuckled. Well, I guess that's the new plan then, Shizune said before the two women shunshined out of sight, preferable to go home like they planned. Naruto had taken Konan to his house and he already spotted Zabuza, Haku and Kin in the room. Zabuza was about to put on his Jonin vest while Kin and Haku were gonna put on their Chunin vests. The best way to avoid detection is to blend in with the background, or in this case the burning village and its shinobi. Well, I take it you guys had fun? Naruto asked them. All three nodded and Konan had to think that the way they smiled was rather creepy looking, but she kept up her stoic face and didn't say anything. Everyone then saw Konan and turned to Naruto for a sort of explanation to the purple-haired woman next to him. Naruto-kun, who's that? Kin asked him. Naruto chuckled and allowed Konan to take a seat on the couch. Konan did well not to make any sudden moves since she was their prisoner. This is Konan, she a member of Akatsuki who's trying to capture all the Biju, although it's a hollow dream now, so nothing to really worry about. So she's our temporary recruit, Naruto told them. Everyone looked at him incredulously before sighing. So she willingly wants to help us? Haku asked. Naruto smirked, but shook his head and Haku raised an eyebrow before everyone gave him a blank stare. You threatened her, didn't you? Zabuza asked him. Naruto swayed his head left and right slightly before sheepishly chuckling and rubbing the back of his head. Everyone's sweat dropped, but then Naruto suddenly got a gleam in his eyes and everyone shivered slightly. The blonde then clapped his hands like he was calling for a butler. Zabuza, take Konan to a place so she may get comfortable. Chop chop, Naruto said, causing Haku and Kin to laugh at an irate Zabuza. The demon of the mist grew a tick mark on his head and gritted his teeth. Why do I have to do it? Why are you even ordering me around here? Zabuza asked, unsheathing his sword. Naruto chuckled and took a few steps back before Zabuza started to chase the blonde around the room. It astounded Konan that despite the situation happening in their village at this very moment, Naruto, Zabuza, Haku and Kin were all laughing like it was a regular day. Why are they laughing? Aren't they concerned for their village at all? Konan thought to herself. Zabuza eventually stopped chasing Naruto and huffed his annoyance at him. It was a joke, Zabuza. Man, you need to lighten up. Take some vacation time or something, Naruto suggested. Zabuza continued to huff, but slowly calmed down and soon the five in the room were graced with another's presence. Ah, Naruto-kun, you and the others are back. And with an extra guest, Makoto said with a warm smile. Naruto nodded and introduced the still silent Konan to Makoto and vice versa. Naruto explained the situation to Makoto and told her to take Konan to a vacant room which was apparently the last one available. Naruto sighed as he and the others would have to build more things. Soon the door opened and revealed Fu, Minato and Kushina with about 3 scrolls each. Hey guys, guess what? We took everything, Fu said, unsealing the scrolls, allowing plenty of weapons to fall to the floor. Zabuza and Kin gasped at the many weapons, but Haku's eyes gleamed, making everyone sweat drop at the ice user. So what did Ka-san and Tu-san get? Naruto asked them. Minato smirked and unsealed plenty of food supplies, which consequently the majority of it was cup ramen and other things. The Yondaime suddenly saw everyone lick their lips while looking at the ramen, and he just confirmed something in his mind. Yep. They all have a thing for ramen. I wonder if it's a Hanyu thing, Minato thought, but ignored it. Alright, we'll deal with this later. Now, has anyone seen? Naruto paused when the door opened to reveal Tsunade, Shizune, Hana, Kiba, and Sum walk through the door. Well, that was fun. I think most of the people know we're gone, but Kurenai and Anko are still out there. I think I smelled Guy and Asuma with them. They're probably fighting right now, Sum reasoned. Naruto sighed with a small chuckle before rubbing the bridge between his eyes. I guess they still wanted to have some fun, Shizune mentioned. Everyone nodded and Naruto was about to walk to the door, but Tsunade and Shizune stopped him. Hey Naruto, we were thinking about the 2 years we would leave Konoha, and Tsunade said she would make it so that the entire family could leave, Shizune told him. Naruto's hand stopped on the doorknob in front of him and he looked down for a second. Well, I'm sure that has its benefits. I'd rather keep the intel from Konoha from the inside. It's not like they can do anything against us, but I'd rather keep them close. Besides that, I'm sure we can squeeze a few more allies out of this village. And besides that, I wanted to get the people who I want alive out of that village before its destruction, and for that I need most of you guys to stay here, Naruto told them. Everyone seemed to understand his reasoning and simply nodded while the blonde left to go get his 2 troublesome ladies. The blonde rushed into the trees and disappeared out of sight completely. After Naruto left, Zabuza along with Haku and Kin decided to go out also and help their village teammates with the unknown threat. The 3 disappeared from view and saw that most of the fires were being put out by those with Suiten chakra and Suiten techniques. Some Kaden techniques were used to counteract the other fires, and others uses Doden techniques to stamp the fire out. Zabuza and Haku took over with Suiten and Kin took with Doden. Some of the Chunin and Jonin stopped the 3 working hard to put out the fires, and it actually made some of them work harder to put them out, but that's not what the 3 were thinking. Man, all that work, all that carnage, gone. I can't believe I have to wait 2 years to do this again, Zabuza thought while making a water dragon slam into raging buildings, thus destroying the fires. Well, that was fun. I can't wait for the other 2 years, Kin said as she crushed the burning building under a Doden technique. I wonder how strong I'll get in the future. Maybe I can take out more people this time. I can't wait for those 2 years. It's gonna be good. So good. Haku grinned with a small demonic smile that made some of the Jonin shiver, but they put that aside since there was work to be done. The fires still raged in some areas and people avoided one particular place. 1. Because it was the most intense, and 2nd, the instantly they tried to go, they were hit by the foulest chakra they could ever feel. It was sickening. Asuma and Kurenai continued to battle with each other. Asuma had to praise the woman's tenacity as he figured she could be a Jinchuriki with the stamina she had. Kurenai on the other hand couldn't say much for Asuma's skills. For normal shinobi, they were more than above average. They were excellent in some areas, but for someone like her, well, they were kinda sad. Kurenai could tell Asuma was exhausted. His flaming knives had lost their flames long ago and he had yet to really give her an injury. Asuma was slightly bleeding on the right side of his face. His right arm was broken and he was limping. It wasn't going good for him at all. He saw that Anko had survived Guy's primary lotus and she ended up fighting the surprised spandex Jonin. Anko had already proved to Guy that she was quite the deadly taijutsu expert. It also helped that Guy had no idea who he was fighting. You would think that the purple hair would have given Anko away, but it didn't, not that she was complaining in the least. Guy had been forced to go into the 3rd gate of the 8 gates and he felt he was only evenly matched up to Anko. Anko, however, saw that he was trying and it thrilled the snake mistress that Guy thought he was actually keeping up with her. The fighting was intense and heavy, but the 2 Jonin of Konoha tried their best to bring their enemy down. Guy rammed a fist at Anko's face, but it didn't connect as Anko grabbed his arm and threw him over her body. Guy huffed in exhaustion at his fruitless efforts. He truly found himself a Youthful. Opponent. Anko suddenly shivered from Guy's thought, but then Guy had enough. He had to help out in other places. He had to end this now. I don't know who you are, but you have no way of beating me now, Guy said as he charged his chakra. Anko raised an eyebrow before widening her eyes to see Guy's skin get redder and the muscles of his body began to strain and show veins. Anko licked her lips and unhinged her eyes, showing them to be slits. Guy had used the gate of opening, healing and life. Now it was time to go further. Gate of pain. Release. Gate of limit. Release. Guy's features changed drastically. Anko felt the power increase and it astounded her greatly. He was at least near Orochimaru's level now, but she knew he was nowhere near done. Guy's skin grew more red, his chakra overflowed and green chakra swirled around him. Gate of view. Release. And lastly, to end it all. Gate of wonder. Release. Guy yelled out and the ground started to shake from the pressure. Anko could tell Guy was always interesting, but this was even better than interesting. Guy was the mere image of a chakra house. He was seen to be sweating blue sweat which evaporated from his body in mere seconds. Anko was actually pushed back for a few seconds by the immense chakra. It was felt by nearly everyone in Konoha. Kurenai and Asuma being the closest besides Anko also stopped their fight to slightly watch the fight unfold. You realize it's over, right? Your friend is finished and so are the rest of your partners, Asuma told Kurenai. The Genjutsu mistress gave a small smirk which wasn't missed by Asuma, who raised an eyebrow in confusion and wondered if Guy could back up the bearded Jonin's claim. Guy had finished his charge. It turned his gaze to Anko. Anko smirked at his new form, but faster than she could or would expect she was sent flying into the air and saw Guy where she stood. That's a good speed boost. As expected of our green beast, Anko thought to herself before backflipping in the air, but in an instant Guy disappeared from view on the ground and slammed Anko in the back with his foot and sent her spiraling into the ground beneath them. The ground made a loud crash and Asuma gave a small smirk. Guy was more than ready for Anko to appear again, and when he saw her shadow in the smoke he quickly vanished again and punched her into another building. Anko had to smile. She never felt so good. The feeling of fighting. The thrill of it all. The demonic blood inside her telling her to go all out with Guy and leave him as a pile of bones in her frenzy. Because of Guy, Anko's hair wasn't in a pineapple shape anymore as the hair came down just past her shoulders. Guy awaited Anko's return if she dared and began to feel the effects of the gates rush in on him, but now wasn't the time to think about the pain, but the opponent in front of him. Suddenly, Guy was graced with a strong chakra spike. Asuma felt it also and so did Kurenai. She's finally gotten serious, though I doubt there's a need to, Kurenai thought with a grin before turning back to Asuma. Well, that's all for tonight then. See you later, Kurenai said, blowing a kiss to Asuma. Before he knew what she meant, Asuma was slammed in the back of the neck by Kurenai's cage bunshin and fell unconscious to the ground. Kurenai smirked at Asuma's unconscious form and continued to watch the fight between Anko and Guy. Guy was treated to a demonic chakra. It was far from human and it was even more foul than he ever felt. Guy, however, didn't back down and Anko came out with a grin. Every feature on her was out in the open. Her ears were out, her eyes were slitted, her claws were sharpened, her canines were in full view. Her tail was out and swaying around. What are you? Guy asked her. Anko grinned at his question and chakra leaked from her body and Anko gave him a death glare, exuding her ki, nearly making the Jonin fall to his feet. I'm just your average Hanyu. Now then, I believe we were just getting started, Anko said, and Guy quickly stood to his feet. Guy vanished fast and tried to hit Anko, but he was in for a shock when Anko smirked and grabbed his fist. You gotta be faster than that, Anko said, slamming her fist into Guy's stomach. Guy coughed and winced from the pain since he had never been hit while using this form before. Anko then squeezed Guy's hand, making it hurt even more. Guy brought his foot around to meet Anko's face, but it was met with her other hand as a block. Both locked eyes for a second, and in that second they vanished and the booming sounds of shockwaves filled the air. Kurenai felt like she was watching fireworks before she was interrupted from her watch. You girls having fun? Naruto said, appearing beside her. Kurenai stood to her feet and smiled. Well, it was fun to fight then, but I think Anko's just having her fun right now, Kurenai said, following their movements with her fox eyes. Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head. She always was the fiery type, Naruto chuckled, making Kurenai nod. Not that you don't like that, right, Naruto-kun? Kurenai cooed. Naruto grinned and shook his head and continued with watching the fight for a bit longer before interrupting. Anko and Guy continued their taijutsu match and were already causing chaos. No matter who struck, even if they missed, they were causing damage to the surrounding area. Both suddenly appeared across from each other and Guy was at his limit. He had overused the gates longer than he wanted and his chakra was low. Anko seemed to be breathing slightly, but she could still keep going if she wanted. The chakra started to leave Guy's body and his skin returned to normal. His muscles were strained and his body was in pain, a lot of it too. Guy dropped to the ground in exhaustion and Anko sighed. Well, you lasted longer than I thought you would anyway, Anko said, hanging her fox features, keeping her power under wraps. Anko looked at the unconscious Guy and smiled. It was fun, Guy. Maybe I'll fight you again in 2 years. If you're not one of us, then I hope you fight till you have nothing to lose, Anko said, vanishing from the field. Both Jonin of Konoha were left on the ground completely exhausted due to their fight. Anko reappeared in the tree with Kurenai as she wiped the sweat from her brow. Had fun? Naruto asked her. Anko chuckled with an embarrassed grin, but nodded and Naruto simply smiled as he patted her back. Well, that was what today was for, ladies. Now then, let's go. We have a long day ahead of us for the next few days, Naruto told them. Kurenai and Anko nodded and the three shunshined out of sight. In Kumo, Yugito had told Reikage about her meeting with Naruto and she stressed that the blonde Hanyu needed to see him. It irked Reikage that the son of Minato and Kushina was alive, but even more so that he'd want to meet with him, but what did the stubborn Kage have to lose? There wasn't that many people stronger than him and there definitely wasn't that many people who were faster than him, so he decided to meet with Naruto. Yugito, send an messenger bird to the Hokage. Tell her I'd like to meet with Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, Reikage told her. Yugito nodded and left to prepare a hawk to go to Konoha. Sighed and slumped into his chair. If it's not one thing, it's another. I wonder what he wants anyway, said before turning back to his paperwork which he so wanted to destroy with a quick flash of lightning, but resisted the attempt. Meanwhile, Yugito strapped message to a bird and sent it off towards Konoha. I wonder if they're doing in Konoha. I barely had the time to hang out with the guy at all, Yugito said to herself, but her tenant decided to input her own opinion. Are you kidding? You haven't stopped talking about him since we met him. Not that I'm complaining. I mean, did you see him? He like a kami on earth. I'd love a go at him if I weren't in this seal. Hey, if he's the Yondaime's kid then he should be able to get me out of here, right? Nibby asked in an excited tone. Yugito chuckled knowing she was about to rain on Nibby's parade even if it was a joke. And what makes you think I'll let him do that? Yugito asked, making Nibby fault in her cage. The female blonde was then treated to some crying and Nibby talking about containers and them being unfair to their biju. Yugito had to chuckle at Nibby's expense and wiped a tear from her eyes. Sorry Nibby, I couldn't resist. I won't promise, but I'll ask him when he arrives, Yugito answered, effectively making Nibby jump up and down in her cage. I knew my kitten was a niece. I'm gonna give that Namikaze the ride of his natural or rather unnatural life, Nibby said, and Yugito had to sweat drop at her biju. I change my mind now. Yugito yelled, making Nibby scream at her biju. This argument went on for a while until they both disappeared. It had been 1 week since the attack on Konoha and needless to say, Naruto and his family had accomplished their goal. They really caused some mass hysteria and most people were too scared to leave their own houses for a few days. Tsunade had put the shinobi into overdrive to find the people responsible. She didn't forget that this could be inside job and had everyone examined by Ibiki and Inoichi. Naruto and his family checked out since everyone claimed to have been with another person and the alibi was airtight. The occasional person did come up and opened a store to help people with food and everything, but construction was really coming down and people were really working to put things back in order since the destruction. Tenten and the other genin had asked Naruto, Haku, Kin, and Kiba what had happened in the village, but all they said was that it was a pretty bad invasion by an unknown force. Multiple memorial services were held for the shinobi and civilians who died in the invasion, with the death count going over 1,000. Tsunade told the families how sorry she was and she would do everything in her power to catch the people responsible. Incidentally, Guy and Asuma were put in the hospital for an extended period due to the fighting, and if not for Tsunade, they really would have been dead. Jiraiya and Yugo had returned from their respective assignments and were shocked that Konoha had been attacked. They saw all the burned buildings and the countless amounts of people working on restoring the place. Yugo had heard of Kakashi's death, and truth be told, she was rather indifferent to it. She did feel partially sad because Kakashi was her senpai and her captain. However, she felt impartial because Kakashi had trained the stuck-up Uchiha and bent over backwards for anything the council told him. That wasn't the mark of a true Anbu, not at all. In the village, some stores had been raided by someone, and most people were broke and were working hard to restore the places and their homes. Jiraiya asked Tsunade what was up, but she did her best act and said she didn't know. She had been buried 10 feet under paperwork and thanked Kami that Naruto told her the secret to it. Hearing Naruto's name, Jiraiya went to check up on his godson and the household. He remembered the news about Akatsuki and he planned to take Naruto with him. Naruto and the others, however, were making plans of their own. Tsunade had told Naruto about the note from Kumo and he thanked her for it. The blonde read the note and made it apparent to meet with Raikage as soon as possible. It also turned out that since the invasion, Ayame and Tsuki had been visiting Naruto's house a lot more since their place was destroyed in the fire, which caused Naruto and Shizune to glare at some of their faces who said that they didn't do it. However, it was gone and both the father and daughter were planning on renovating, but with the repairs of everything, it wouldn't be done for a while, so Naruto allowed the two to stay in his house. Naruto, with the help of his family and his Kage Bunshins, was able to make another compound, albeit the same height as his own part of the compound. He made it virtually the same as his for others. Ayame and Tsuki took up residence there, and needless to say, when the two had the required ingredients, it was like a ramen night at the Namikaze compound. Not much else was a problem, not even Konan. The purple-haired woman had been mostly quiet for the first few days since she didn't have much to talk about, but Naruto, Shizune, and the rest of the family actually got her to talk, even if it was for a bit. She generally didn't say much, but she had told Naruto that he was the most perplexing man she had ever met. Naruto didn't know whether to take that for an insult or compliment, but he chose the compliment. When Jiraiya had told Naruto about Akatsuki, Naruto and Shizune packed their things for their trip, and Tsunade requested that Yugo go with them as a sort of downtime for the Anbu. Yugo wanted to relent that she didn't need any downtime, but one look from Tsunade and the female Anbu side and nodded. She knew it was useless, but she could have tried, she guessed. Everyone else was left in the village to train and do other things. Naruto left Kushina and Zabuza in charge of everything while they were gone, and the two accepted. Naruto had wanted to go and see how Yagura was doing with Oto, which the Sanbi Jinchuriki claimed was doing very well. It was even better than when Orochimaru was there. Alright, you guys were leaving, Naruto told them. Everyone nodded and came to see them off. Shizune put her scrolls away and Yugo was still in her Anbu attire, but it was a bit cooler. Well, Naruto, let's go. Time waits for no one, Jiraiya said to him. Naruto chuckled with a nod along with Shizune and Yugo. Oh, and Jiraiya, Kushina called out. Yes, he answered. If my Sochi comes back a pervert, I'll kill you, Kushina said, knowing it was a bit late to be saying that, but she felt the need to scare Jiraiya and scare him. She did as the Sannin cowered behind Naruto's shoulder, but nodded. Soon the four walked off from the village, and it didn't take long before they reached a hill. Naruto looked back at Konoha and gave a demonic smile while unhanging his red, slitted eyes. Live for these 2 years, Konoha. They're the last time you will ever see the light of day again, Naruto said before turning back to the road and disappearing. Kushina and the others returned to the village and began their own fun. All right, time to scout people. We've got 2 years, so let's get to it, Anko said with her fist pumped. Everyone chuckled, but nodded and shunshined out of sight. Konoha's countdown is starting, and its final day of reckoning will soon start. The death of everything that breathes within Konoha's walls. In 2 years, it burns to the ground. Naruto, Jiraiya, Yugo, Shizune, and Tayuya were all busy going through a random town. Jiraiya had stressed to Naruto the importance of learning how to control Kyuubi's chakra, but the blonde told him that there was no need to learn it. Naruto knew Jiraiya was curious as to why he would refuse training from the Sannin, and so was Yugo, but he managed to deter them with the saying that due to certain things, the Kyuubi wouldn't be helping him. Jiraiya and Yugao wondered what he meant, but didn't press the issue. As far as Jiraiya was concerned, they just had to stay away from Akatsuki until Naruto was strong enough to take care of himself, which the blonde was, but he couldn't tell Jiraiya that just yet. In the 3 weeks time period, Naruto had suggested to the group that they go to Odo and dig up on some intel about Orochimaru. Jiraiya would have slapped the blonde for the audacity he said to them, but Shizune nodded in agreement and even said that since she and Naruto were Jonin shinobi that they could go if they wanted to. Yugao had chuckled at Jiraiya's expense as they headed to Odo. While Jiraiya and Yugao did some intel on Odo for the time being, Naruto and Shizune secretly checked up with Yugura wanting their real information. Yugura had told them that Odo was doing real well for itself and he introduced Naruto and Shizune to Tayuya, who at first scoffed seeing Naruto and Shizune were the same height as her, but when Yugura told her that Naruto was the leader she instantly started cussing up a storm on them. Shizune then told Naruto that Tayuya reminded her of Kushina in a sense, which Naruto chuckled. However, Tayuya and Naruto turned out to be quite alright with each other. It took some time for the two to get used to each other, but not that long. Tayuya had constantly questioned the blonde about his power and the death of Orochimaru. It was amusing to Shizune that Naruto and Tayuya got into a cussing argument about Orochimaru's death and whether it was possible or impossible. In the end, Naruto won, but only because Tayuya couldn't think of anything more to say on the matter. Despite the arguments, Naruto had gotten along real well with Tayuya and Tayuya with him. She even gave him the nickname, Golden Shithead, and Naruto called her, Tomato Bitch, which had Shizune laughing at each name. When most of Odo heard from Yugura that Naruto was the person he was talking about as the one who planned the invasion of Odo, most were skeptical at first, but Yugura convinced them all and the people followed Naruto, but the blonde held a better idea. He had allowed Yugura to stay in charge of Odo as the Odokage since the blonde would be moving around too much to do it and the Sanbi Jinchuriki was more than happy to do it. Naruto had also give Yugura the fox mark and the Sanbi Jinchuriki found it strange at first, but it felt awesome. He had a much better mastery over water manipulation than before. Yugura's features seemed to be mellowed with the Sanbi's chakra. It did worry him about having fox powers while being a Jinchuriki of the Sanbi, but it all worked out fine. He had light gray fox ears and a light gray fox tail. Yugura adapted to his power quickly and told Naruto to take Tayuya with them to get her used to the idea of being around them as Hanyu. Naruto nodded and took Tayuya with him and Shizune then explained to Jiraiya and Yugao that they found her in the village and that she didn't want to be there anymore, which confused Tayuya, but one quick explanation from Shizune and Tayuya played along with it. Currently, the group was headed to Kumo since Tsunade had received the letter and sent Konan to deliver it, which at first the purple-haired woman relented, but in the end she went with it. So Golden Shithead, where are we right now? Tayuya asked with a grin. Jiraiya and Yugao sweat dropped at her attitude, but Naruto and Shizune were more or less amused with it. Tayuya gave things a nice change of pace for everyone. Well, Tomato Bitch, we are at the edge of Tea Country and will be crossing into Snow Country soon enough, Naruto replied. Jiraiya and Yugao sweat dropped again, but Tayuya gave a small. At least someone had some balls to mock her like she mocked people. Most of the trip had been quiet and everyone noticed that the sun was going down for them all, so they all went to a hotel and Jiraiya paid for everyone. Since they were used to it from their previous mission, Naruto, Shizune, and Yugao took one room and Jiraiya took another. Tayuya had taken another vacant room, not opting to sleep with the old pervert even if she died. Naruto, Shizune and Yugao had placed their stuff down and rested on the beds, which coincidentally had both Yugao and Shizune taking each of Naruto's arms. Naruto chuckled as this probably wouldn't end well for him, but then the blonde had an idea for his family. He remembered the dragon summoning contract he held and he decided that he shouldn't be the only one to sign it. Naruto leaned up from the bed and turned to Shizune. Hey Shizune-chan, don't you think we should give our family some summons? Naruto asked her. Shizune raised an eyebrow at what the blonde was implying, but knowing Naruto she smirked and leaned up. Well, if you mean your dragon summoning contract, I don't see why not. I've always wanted a summon, Shizune said and Naruto chuckled at her. Naruto told Yugao the same thing and the Anbu was more than happy to have some companionship if she could help it. Naruto bit his thumb and went through the hand signs to summon his familiar. Kuchio's no jutsu, Naruto yelled and slammed the ground. Smoke covered the area and soon a light dragon appeared and smiled. Hello Naruto-sama. It's been a while since you summoned me, Kiara said with a glare, and Naruto sheepishly chuckled. There wasn't that many things he could summon her for, but he did rightly apologize. Sorry about that, Kiara-chan, I'll summon the dragons more frequently. I summoned you so that you could bring me the dragon contract, Naruto told her. Kiara nodded and immediately the contract puffed beside her and nudged it over to Naruto. What do you plan on doing with it? Kiara asked him. Naruto smirked and unfurled the scroll before placing it on the ground. Yugao and Shizune saw his name in blood on the paper and Naruto smiled at them. I'm gonna have my family sign this contract. I want the Namikaze family to sign this contract. I was hoping that the dragons would become our family's personal summons, Naruto told her. Kiara widened her eyes for a second before grinning. That's great, Naruto-sama. If you want it, then it's fine. The dragons will serve the Namikaze family long till the end of time, Kiara said, and Naruto chuckled at that since that statement was more or less true even if Kiara didn't know it. Thank you, Kiara-chan. Now then, Shizune-chan, Yugao-chan, write your names on the seal and you both will receive your own personal dragon summons. There are fire dragons, water dragons, earth dragons, wind dragons, lightning dragons, dark dragons, light dragons and mystic dragons. So go ahead girls and summon your desired element dragon, Naruto told them. Both women smirked at each other and both bit their thumbs. Shizune wrote her name first and after her was Yugao. When both names were imprinted on the scroll, the paper glowed for a bit and then it faded back into nothingness. Now then, summon the element dragon you want and you'll get one. There are plenty with personal attitudes, so don't think you're limited to only one, Naruto told them. Shizune and Yugao went through their hand signs and slammed them on the ground. Kuchios. Kurai Ryu, summoning. Dark Dragon, Shizune yelled out. Kuchios. Hikari Ryu, summoning. Light Dragon, Yugao yelled out. Soon 2 puffs of smoke came while Naruto and Kiara were watching the things go down, with Naruto scratching Kiara's ears making her growl. Shizune stared at a black dragon with red eyes. Its wings were tucked under away and it bowed to her. Hello ma'am. I'm Shiro. I'll be your personal summon, Shiro said, and Shizune smirked. She then softly petted Shiro on his back and her hands took into account the scales and other things on him. Shiro growled lowly and then Shizune smiled. Nice to meet you, Shizune. I'm Shizune Uzumaki Namikaze. I hope to work well with you as my personal summon, Shizune replied and Shiro nodded. The two then went on to their conversation about some things until they all heard Yugao gasp. Naruto and Shizune turned their heads to see Yugao and a pure white dragon staring at her. It stared a bit longer before bowing. Hello, I'm Kya. Nice to meet you. I'll be your personal summon from this day forward, Kya said, and Yugao couldn't resist hugging her dragon. Kya chuckled at this since she had never had human contact before, so it was all new to her. Soon both Shiro and Kya turned to see Naruto and Kiara smiling at them and both bowed low to them. Naruto-sama, thank you for making us, allowing us to be the personal summons to your family. We won't let you down, they said to him. Naruto chuckled and nodded before standing to his feet and patting the 2 dragons on their heads. It's all right, you two. I'm more than glad to have you, and my girls seem to like you, Naruto said, making them nod. The blonde Hanyu then turned back to Kiara as he wrapped up the scroll. Kiara-chan, can you go back to the Namikaze compound and hand this scroll to Kushina and Zabuza? Tell them that they and everyone else are to sign the dragon contract. From now on, the Namikaze family is the only family that will have the dragon contract, Naruto told her. Kiara nodded and took the scroll in her mouth, but before she left, Naruto had to ask Kiara something. Nay, Kiara-chan, what's a dragon's lifespan? Naruto asked her. Kiara raised an eyebrow before dropping the scroll to the floor. Well, we normally live for more than a millennium. Course humans don't live as long as we do. Why? Kiara asked, and Naruto gave a small grin before rubbing the back of his cheek. Well, the thing is, Kiara-chan, me and my family are Hanyu. We're half demons, so we're never going to die. We'll be living forever, Naruto told her. Naruto then inwardly cursed. He said that right in front of Yugao, who was still in the damn room. What the hell was wrong with him? Meanwhile, Kiara was in shock over those words. Normally dragons were a symbol of immortality, but they had been slightly downplayed since they never had a human contract or someone immortal before. Kiera suddenly smirked when she knew how strong the ties would be for the dragons to the Namikaze family. Well, Naruto-sama, that might not be a problem. In fact, that's the greatest of news. Well, we'll be going to your family's house. Good night, Kiera said as she, Shiro, and Kei all disappeared in a poof. It was then that Naruto and Shizune turned to Yugao, who had a curious smile on her face. Mind explaining that Hanyu part Naruto-kun? Yugao asked with a too innocent smile. Naruto gulped and Shizune took cover behind Naruto's shoulder. It was so weird that two of the most powerful beings on this planet would be scared shitless by a woman and her ki. Shizune-chan, if there was ever a time I wanted to die, it would be now. Naruto-kun, it was nice knowing you, my husband. Meanwhile, Konoha was still in turmoil. Most people were finally able to brave the outside, but a lot were still staying inside their homes. Most of the genin were given the details by their senseis and such. Lee, Neji, and Tenten were amazed that Guy had fought someone who could keep up with him using 7 of the 8 gates. That person couldn't be human to do that. Lee and Guy went to shout about Anko's youth and fire even if they didn't know it was here, and this caused Anko, who was quietly enjoying her dango, to shudder like an extremely cold wind had hit her. Kurenai and Kiba were able to come up with guys that they didn't know much since they were busy putting out the fires in Konoha while other Jonin and Chunin were busy fighting off the enemy. Shino and Hinata seemed to buy it, so they didn't press the issue anymore. Tsunade and Fu were surrounded by dozens of paperwork for a week, and they thanked Naruto so much for the secret to this labor, and they got it all done with more time to spar. The two then engaged in casual conversation over their blonde kami, which involved Fu blushing most of the time. Makoto and Kushina were oddly talking about their times with Naruto, and both women blush for different reasons. Makoto for even going for it and Kushina for doing it with her son, but neither complained in the least. However, Makoto was downright jealous when Kushina flashed her ring right in front of the female Uchiha's face. It certainly made the female Uchiha want to see Naruto and have him give her one. They all started up their training again, and the two were still quite the duo despite being so long apart from each other. Haku, Kin, and Zabuza were a team for the most part since Naruto and Shizune were gone. The Jonin and 2 Chunin had been taking mission after mission like all the others to help with Konoha's repairs. It certainly helped that they had their never-ending, demonic stamina. They currently helped the most A and B ranked missions completed than any other shinobi, except maybe Anbu. Minato, Hana, and Sum were simply relaxing at the compound since they didn't have much to do. The 3 weeks were sort of hectic for them. It was all amazing that they had to move so much even if they were Hanyu. The repairs took forever, and it was mainly only because of the Namikaze family and their legendary stamina that things were going ahead of schedule. So when the latest week rolled by, everyone was happy to be on break and not doing work. It was also funny that Konoha was none the wiser to their plans at all. Currently, everyone was simply sitting around the compound with bored expressions on their faces. Outside missions, there wasn't really anything to do since Naruto and Shizune were the ones who gave them things to do. Someone please give me something to do, Kiba groaned as he laid on the couch with Akamaru sleeping on his stomach. Sum and Hana groaned, also asking for the same thing. Ayame, Haku, Kushina and Makoto were making dinner for everyone, so there wasn't much to do. Konan was sipping some tea while keeping her emotionless mask on, but her boredom was evident also. Konan had really opened up to mostly everyone in the few weeks. Granted that most of them were talking to her and she wasn't replying much, and she felt slightly bad for not replying back to the odd conversations that they were trying to have with her. Konan had eventually opened up a little more, and she decided not to escape, even if she sometimes wanted to. To her, for some reason they all reminded her of how the original Akatsuki organization acted at times. It was one of the things that put a small smile across her face. As Konan sipped her tea, she gave a small smile to Kiba and closed her book. Wanna read this book, Kiba-san? Konan asked, and Kiba raised an eyebrow. Kiba was by no means a book person, but being bored made people do weird things in their lives. Kiba simply shrugged his shoulders and nodded while gently taking the book from Konan's hands. Konan then took out another book and simply read that one. Kiba walked over to the couch and opened the book and began reading. Sum and Hana widened their eyes at the Inuzuka Hanyu reading. Never in their lives would they have thought that Kiba would actually read. Almost like reading their thoughts, Kiba sent his mother and sister a death glare, and the two turned their gazes from him and simply settled for awkward whistling. Kiba grinned and went back to reading before getting a small blush across his face. Konan-san, what is this book? Kiba asked the paper user. Konan looked up from her book and raised an eyebrow. It's a aero drama. I'm not used to such things, but I found it laying around the house so I read it. Is it interesting to you, Kiba-san? Konan asked, making Kiba grow an even bigger blush across his face while the book in his hands was shaking slightly. Who do you think wrote it? Kin asked, twirling around a kunai in her hand. Whose ever it is, that person must have some weird tastes, Zabuza said, entering the conversation. Anko and Kurenai nodded while reading books of their own until everyone was startled by a big poof. Everyone gasped and nearly fell from their seats before grabbing their kunai only to see Kiera coughing slightly. Everyone looked at the dragon in awe and Kiera straightened her throat. Is this the Namikaze compound? Kiera asked just to be sure. Zabuza nodded and Kiera sighed with a smile. She was carrying a scroll and she slipped it on the ground. I'm Kiera. Most of you have met me before back when Naruto-sama introduced me. Naruto-sama has said to let everyone here to sign the dragon contract. He said that the dragons will become the Namikaze family's personal summon contract and we agreed. You will all choose from the many types of dragons and one will be your personal summon. Will you all sign? Kiera asked them. Everyone's eyes gleamed at her words and instantly nodded. The chance to have your own personal dragon. It was something out of a fairy tale. This was just the excitement that they all needed. Naruto always came through for them after all. Everyone dropped what they were doing and eagerly walked over. Kushina unfurled the scroll and everyone saw Naruto's name, Shizun's name, and Yugao's name over the scroll. Kiera gave everyone the types for dragons they could pick from and everyone had understood. Kushina went first and bit her thumb, then wrote her name in the scroll. The light glowed, then faded, and Kushina slammed her hand on the ground. Kuchios. Kasai Ryu, Kushina yelled. Soon a puff of smoke came and quickly disappeared. Kushina was greeted to a red dragon whose scales matched her hair. Hello. My name is Kira and I will be your personal summon, Kira said, and Kushina smiled. Both bowed to each other and the dragon took the time to look around the house that her summoner lived in. Soon, Hana and Kiba got excited and drew their names in the contract also. Kuchios. Mizu, K's, Reiki, Ryu. The three Inuzukas yelled and they each slammed the ground. Hana was greeted to a water dragon whose scales were blue while Sum was greeted to a wind dragon whose scales were white like Kiera's, but they weren't as vibrant. Lastly, Kiba was greeted to a lightning dragon whose scales were black, but small traces of lighting were coursing through them. I am Arya. I'm Komano, and I'm Kaoru. We are your personal summons, the three dragons said, bowing to Kiba, Hana, and Sum. The three Inuzukas smiled and nodded. Like Kira, the three other dragons ran around the compound to check it out and soon the other came also. Zabuza, Haku, and Kin did theirs and slammed their hands on the ground. Kuchios. Mizu, Shikyu, Ryu, Zabuza, Haku, and Kin yelled. Soon 2 water dragons and 1 earth dragon appeared. Each dragon bowed its head to its new master. I'm Tenho, I'm Tengo, and I'm Soren. We are your personal summons, the 3 dragons said to the 3. Zabuza grinned along with Haku and Kin and the 3 bowed also. Next were Tsunade, Minato, and Fu. Makoto and Konan had their second thoughts about doing it, but Konan more than Makoto. She had never summoned before and it felt like pledging true allegiance to Naruto's family. Could Konan go through with it? Could Makoto go through with it? Minato having died, his contract with the Toads was gone, so he could summon with the rest of his family, so he did. Minato got a wind dragon named Nami, Tsunade got an earth dragon named Roan, and Fu got a dark dragon named Fury. Everyone loved their dragons currently. Anko wasn't sure she could sign it since she had a contract with the snakes, so Kurenai went next. Kurenai got a light dragon named Kuren. When the current people were done, dragons were ablaze around the house and suddenly everyone looked at the 3 who didn't go. Anko, why aren't you gonna sign? Kurenai asked softly, petting Kuren. Anko gave a small grin and shrugged her shoulders. I hold the snake contract. I'm better off being known as the snake mistress, Anko said, but Kiera shook her head. Anko-san, I'd like you to reconsider. I know how rare and powerful the snakes are, and in truth, as being reptiles like the snakes or at least related to them, you can hold both. It won't cause many problems, but try not to start one, Kiera told her. Anko's face suddenly gleamed and she slightly bowed in a thank you. Anko signed the contract and she summoned a fire dragon. Its name was Furin. Furin bowed to his summoner and Anko had to admit that her summon looked really nice. Lastly were Conan and Makoto, who still seemed rather hesitant. Makoto, you should sign. I don't see why not, Kushina said, making Makoto narrow her eyes. She was sure that she wanted to stay with the family and everything, but there was something holding her back. Kushina, I'm not sure. Maybe I shouldn't, Makoto said, and then Kushina gripped her best friend's hand and slightly squeezed it, making Makoto wince. Makoto, you slept with my Sochi. You're as much a part of this family as everyone else. You're signing that contract, Databane. Kushina threatened and Makoto gulped, but strangely, she felt better. Makoto nodded and did her summoning also. Makoto got a fire dragon named Zoran. He seemed nice enough, so Makoto liked him enough. She settled for giving her dragon soft rubs behind his ears, which Zoran really liked. Well, Conan-san, you might as well, Haku said, and everyone nodded. Conan looked at the contract and then looked at the ground. She doubted she could go through with it. For some reason, she was scared to sign it. She wasn't sure why, but it unsettled her slightly. Ayame and Tuki, not being shinobi, opted to not sign unless they had to, which everyone understood. Conan got up from her seat and sighed. Can I think about it for a bit? Conan asked. Everyone looked at her, but Kiera nodded and wrapped up the scroll. Conan slowly walked up the stairs and left everyone else behind, saying that she wasn't feeling very hungry tonight. Did I do something wrong? Kiera asked. Everyone shook their heads and gave Kiera a reassuring smile. I kind of understand how she feels. Despite how well we all got along, Conan-san has only been here for a while and it's too early for her to give her heart and soul to Naruto-kun's cause. I held back out of some unregistered fear, but it was gone. Conan-san doesn't have that luxury, Makoto said to everyone. Soon all the dragons disappeared in heaps of smoke and Kiera left with a bow. Well, pup, was that exciting enough for you? Sume asked towards Kiba. The Inuzuka blushed with a nod, but then his stomach grumbled and everyone laughed. Dinner will be ready soon, everyone, Kushina and Haku yelled. Everyone suddenly drooled when the aroma was starting to exit the kitchen. Meanwhile, Naruto and Shizune were trying to save their skin by telling Yugao about being Hanyu and some of its other things. They left out Kyuubi dying and most of the invasion plots since Naruto hadn't been with her long. Yugao seemed to accept their explanation of everything, but she would be keeping an eye on her blonde boyfriend and his accomplice. Meanwhile, Kiera came back and reported everything to Naruto that occurred at the Namikaze compound. Naruto was happy that everyone seemed happy with their summons, but he gave a sort of small smile when he heard Conan didn't sign it, but he knew that people like Conan shouldn't be rushed into doing something. It would only make her hate him if he forced her to sign the contract, which he just wouldn't do. Naruto thanked Kiera and the Mystic Dragon took her leave. Naruto then realized it was getting late and the blonde decided it was time to go to bed. Shizune and Yugao agreed and the three went to sleep also to get on with the next day. Morning. Naruto and his girls woke up to the sunlight and immediately got dressed. They all had a peaceful sleep and could say that they felt quite well rested. Naruto slipped into a black shirt which covered his mesh shirt and black pants. He then wore his Jonin vest along with his customary demon sage coat. Shizune simply wore her black kimono and her some short-length high heels which concealed her mesh shirt and most of her concealed weapons. Yugao just settled for wearing her Anbu armor since she felt more comfortable in it for traveling. Alright, let's go, Naruto told them. Shizune and Yugao nodded and the three left their room and walked downstairs to see Jiraiya and Tayuya waiting for them. Jiraiya was reading a book and Tayuya was pacing the floor until she saw them all arrive. Well, it's about time you got here, golden shithead. What the took you so long? Tayuya asked, making Naruto sheepishly chuckled at her before he replied to her answer. Sorry about that, Tomato-san. We got wrapped up in some things, Naruto told her. Tayuya raised an eyebrow at him, but accepted the answer and the entire group left the hotel. It was only going to be a few more hours till they got to Kumo and they wanted a fresh start. Normally it would be days before they could get to Kumo, but with mostly everyone's stamina it would only take a few more hours. After a quick breakfast at a local restaurant, the five headed out of the town and towards their destination. About 7 or 8 hours later, 2 Kumo guards were currently guarding the entrance to Kumo with a bored look on their faces. It had to be the most boring job in Kumo besides doing the Raikage's paperwork. Suddenly 5 figures came into the distance and the guards tensed when they saw the Kumo headband on them, but they didn't react just yet. Naruto and his group came up to the gates and immediately went to the guards. "We're from Konoha. Your Raikage said that he wanted to see me," Naruto asked. The 2 Kumo nin widened their eyes when they saw the blonde that Raikage told them about and immediately nodded. Naruto and his group showed their identification and the guards allowed the group to proceed. Tayuya had been granted permission to enter from Odo claiming to solidify some things with the Raikage so she was allowed entrance. It was still slightly late in the afternoon so the sun was still high in the sky, but the clouds of Kumo made it kind of hard to see, but they didn't care much. People turned their glances to the son of the Yondaime and it unnerved Naruto slightly. "Ah, the joy of being glared at," Naruto said in a sarcastic tone. Shizune and Tayuya chuckled at him while Yugao and Jiraiya wondered what the Raikage wanted with Naruto. It did worry the two that Naruto might have gotten in trouble with Kumo, but Naruto told them it was probably a diplomatic mission from Tsunade so they bought it for now. Yugao was probably a bit more trusting of Naruto since she had been rather intimate with Naruto in the last few weeks. They did have an intense makeout session at one point, but Yugao wouldn't go beyond that. Naruto figured it was probably fear that held her back so he didn't push his concerns on her. It took a bit of time for Naruto and the others to make it to the Raikage mansion, but when they did, they were met with the blonde Nibi Jinchuriki and some of her other friends. "Hey Yugito-chan, staying out of trouble kitten?" Naruto asked and Yugito gave a small blush. Next to her were all the other faces that Naruto remembered. There was Samui, Karui, Omoi, Mabui and some others. Naruto also saw B who still never got over that rapping habit. "So Yugi-chan, dis is the Gaki you kept talking about. How's it going bro?" B asked in a rap and Naruto chuckled while rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's fine 8. Sorry to rush things, but can I go to the Raikage now?" Naruto asked. Samui raised an eyebrow, but Mabui nodded and escorted the group to the Raikage's office. Naruto also noticed that him and his group were being kept a close watch on by Samui, Karui, and Omoi. The blonde Hanyu wasn't that concerned over it though. He knew they were just looking out for suspicious behavior so it was normal. When everyone walked in through the room, Naruto saw the Raikage waiting for him and the group stepped in. The Raikage gave Naruto a deep glare and the blonde glared right back. The two seemed to duel with each other's eyes for a bit and everyone's sweat dropped at their interaction, but then the two settled and Raikage decided to talk. "Welcome to Kumo Namikaze-san. I heard for Yugito that you wanted to see me. As you can see, I'm in hurry so make this short and brief because I have work to do. Now then, what do you want to talk about?" Raikage asked. Naruto smirked as he liked that. "Let's hurry and get this over with" attitude and he wanted to hurry too. There were things that needed to be done in this training period and he wanted to get them all out of the way. "Alright Raikage-sama, I'll make this quick," Naruto said as the entire room began to hear his words. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere in an underground structure, 2 figures were in the underground ring of the base and multiple people were on the ground groaning in pain. The 2 figures grinned before walking back to their rooms. The first Sasuke who grew taller over the weeks, next was Sakura. She also grew taller and the two were quite unstoppable. Kimimaro had brought them to the underground ring nearly every day, but he also trained them and they grew stronger with the passing times. Sasuke had wielded his Sharingan even better and through all the vigorous training, he unlocked the next stage which was the Mangekyo Sharingan. Having gained the next Sharingan really elevated the Uchiha's pride as a warrior and the so-called elite of the elites. Sakura had become quite the Genjutsu mistress as far as she knew. She would have said she was on the level of Kurenai, but not knowing the real Genjutsu mistress was a Hanyu, she had to believe so. Both had spent quite a bit of time together and Sakura had become the emo's girlfriend. She was also his best friend as she could sympathize with him about losing family. It was weird to Sasuke that he attained the Mangekyo without killing Sakura, which for his cause he would have, but now he didn't have to. "So Sasuke-kun, when are we going back to Konoha? I'm sure they'll all be on their knees when we come back," Sakura said, wrapping her arms around Sasuke. The emo Uchiha grinned and softly stroked the bubblegum princess's hair while the two left the outer rings of the underground base and went back to their rooms. That's right, Sakura. In 2 years, we're going to go and make them bow. I'll make the Uchiha name known throughout the entire world. Then I'll kill that damn Dobi and his entire family. I can't wait to see the look on his face when I end him, Sasuke said, and Sakura nodded with him. Soon a red-haired girl came and pounced on Sasuke while smiling. Sasuke-kun, when are you going to get rid of this girl here and come with me? She asked, and Sasuke sighed. It seemed he always had the weirdest girls going after him. Sakura narrowed her eyes at her rival and gritted her teeth. Get off my boyfriend, Karen Baka, Sakura said, and Karen raised an eyebrow at her. HMPH. Flat chests shouldn't try to say anything to those who are more mature, Karen said, and Sakura's eyebrow twitched. Apparently, Karen didn't know that Sakura had been working on her taijutsu along with her genjutsu, and while she was nowhere near Tsunade, she could still pack one hell of a wallop. That's what Karen got when she was slammed across the room. Damn, that hurt, Karen said, healing herself. Sakura grinned and Sasuke gave a small smirk. Maybe now you'll learn to keep your hands to yourself, Sakura said as she and Sasuke walked off, leaving a pouting Karen behind. While they walked, each had their own objectives for when they would return to Konoha. Once it's Konoha, then I'll expand Konoha's power and I'll take the other nations into my grip. All will know and revel in the name of the Uchiha. Get ready for the reckoning of your life, Dobi. Once Sasuke-kun takes over Konoha, I'll put all those idiots to work and we'll find out who killed my mother. I'll give that person the most dangerous genjutsu of a lifetime. Then I'll send that bitch Shizune on an S-rank suicide mission thanks to my Sasuke-kun. I can't wait till she dies. Both walked into the darkness with dark smiles across their faces. Konoha could be none the more wiser to the intent of the two, but everyone was none the less wiser to Naruto and his family. Naruto and Raikage were in a heated debate currently, and it was over something that made everyone chuckle and it made Yugito blush. Naruto told Raikage about Akatsuki and how they would be coming for Yugito and B. Naruto hid the part about his family defeating 2 Akatsuki members already, but Raikage told Naruto that neither Jinchuriki had to be moved. Naruto went on the attack and said that the Gobi, Rokubi, and Yonbi had all been captured by Akatsuki, and while Naruto did mention that most of that was Iwa's and Kiri's fault, it was still a problem that should be taken care of. So why should I trust the Namikaze family to do this? If you're as strong as you say, then you should be able to handle Akatsuki yourself, Raikage said, and Naruto paused. He knew Raikage had a point, and for him, there was no disputing that they very well could destroy the Akatsuki whenever they wanted, but he wasn't about to tell anyone why they could. Naruto turned to Yugito and gave her a questioning glare. Yugito's blush deepened, and it seemed that Nibi had something to say also. Wow, kitten, I can't tell if he's fighting for your well-being or both you and B, but it seems like it's the former. How romantic he is. He's going up against the Raikage to keep you safe. Maybe you should reward your shinobi in shining armor, Nibi replied, and Yugito's blush deepened. Naruto turned back and nearly slammed his hands on the table. I'll do anything to keep Yugi-chan safe. I know about B's accomplishments as a shinobi and I trust him to know how to deal with Akatsuki, but I care for Yugito like I care for my entire family. You might think I'm kidding, but I'm serious. Now that I ask, how do I know you can protect Yugi-chan? Naruto asked, and everyone gasped when they heard that. No one had ever talked to the fastest man alive like that. Well, probably the 3rd fastest, but let's stop splitting hairs. What are you getting at, Gaki? Raikage asked with a grin, and Naruto's eyes beamed. He really wasn't sure how he felt about Yugito since that time he met her in Kiri, but he did like her and he would have preferred for her to stay close to him. I'm saying I'll fight you, and if I win, then you will become an ally of the Namikaze clan and Yugi-chan will come on the 2-year training with me, Shizune-chan, Yugao-chan, Tayuya and Jiraiya, Naruto told him. Jiraiya immediately stepped up and grabbed Naruto's shoulder. Naruto clans don't work like that. If a clan has connections with an outside influence, then it is mutiny in Konoha, Jiraiya told him. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the Sannin and he knew he was right, but come on. Naruto's clan already had Kiri for an ally, it had Oto, and it was a family of half-demons. Where the hell is that normal anyway? Suddenly, everyone heard laughing and Raikage slammed his hands on the desk. Alright, brat, Show me what you've got. If you're as strong as you say, then you should have no problem fighting me. I'll agree to those conditions, but if you lose, then you never show your face around Kumo again or I'll kill you, Raikage said, and everyone gulped. But Naruto grinned, and then the Namikaze head and the Raikage dueled each other with their ki, and everyone nearly choked except for Shizune, Yugito, and B. Alright, Raikage, just don't complain when I do win. Trust me, when I say you'll be left on your knees when I'm through with you, Naruto said as he and his group walked out of the room. You just wanted to fight the Raikage, didn't you? Shizune asked, and Naruto grinned. Was it that obvious? But I do care for Yugito-chan. I don't know when Akatsuki will get her, so I'm not taking any chances. Originally it was Hidan and Kakuzu as far as I know, but with those two biting the dust, well, they might send someone else and I can't allow that, Naruto told her. Shizune chuckled while she shook her head at her blonde. Well, try not to kill him, Shizune finally said with emphasis on the word, try. Naruto sighed and nodded absently as everyone walked off and into the distance. Having left the Raikage mansion and being escorted to a hotel where they would stay for about a week, Naruto and his group each registered themselves to their rooms and were getting settled. The blonde laid on his bed while Shizune and Yugo were in the other one. As Naruto unpacked his clothes, he was suddenly met with a small smack over the head, making him rub the back of his head, but he had an idea on who it was and why they did it. Yugao-chan, what was that for? Naruto asked. Yugao glared at Naruto and rested some of her armor on the bed and shook Naruto's coat violently. Shizune chuckled at Naruto's expense while Yugao decided to criticize her blonde for his actions those few minutes ago. Why the hell would you fight the Raikage? Is this all for the sake of adding another girl to this harem? Yugao asked, and Naruto widened his eyes at her and her proclamation. Even Shizune dropped her jaw when Yugao figured out that Naruto had a harem. Yugao looked from Shizune to Naruto and sighed. Please, you think you could keep something like that a secret from me? I'm an Anbu captain for Kami's sake. Granted the fact that you kept the secret of being Hanyu away from me, I've already let Hokage-sama know about this, Yugao said with a grin, but it didn't last long as she saw Naruto and Shizune chuckle and she wondered what was so funny. I hate to burst your bubble, Yugao-chan, but Tsunade-chan already knows that. You might even say that she finds it interesting from a medical standpoint, Naruto told Yugao. The Anbu raised an eyebrow, then turned to Shizune, who nodded in agreement with Naruto. That's not the point. What's the point here is that you want to challenge the Raikage and I say you're insane for trying it, let alone actually beat him, Yugao said, and Naruto sighed. He still kept a great deal of power back and he knew he could take Raikage. Shizune knew it and Tayuya had a feeling. Jiraiya. Naruto had a small feeling, but he didn't act on it too much. You should have some faith in your blonde, Yugao-chan, you know I won't lose, Naruto countered with that baseless faith of his, making Yugao raise an eyebrow. You're a jonin, but you're still a kid. Raikage has much more experience than you in everything and he's physically stronger than you. Add to the fact that you're fighting in his known territory makes this much more of a challenge. Naruto-kun, if you have any way of beating the Raikage, then please let me know now. I don't like to worry about you. I don't want to lose you in a match. So try to convince me that you'll win, Yugao begged, and Naruto lowered his gaze to the ground. He turned to Shizune looking for her opinion on this, and the Hanyu woman simply smiled with a nod. Naruto sighed and got up from the bed. All right, Yugao-chan. I don't want you sad, so I'll show it to you, Naruto told her. Yugao raised an eyebrow and Naruto allowed all of his fox features to come out along with his proper height, allowing all of the power that went along with them to flow out, making Yugao breath get blown away from all of it at once. She almost dropped to the floor from the pressure and she took a strong look at Naruto. She gazed into his red, slitted eyes that seemed to be on fire, which made him look hot. His cute tail swaying around and the amazing looking fox ears. She also took a quick note at his height, which obviously made him a bit taller than her. Naruto-kun, what happened to you? Yugao asked, still trying to keep from succumbing to the weight of the chakra that was evident in the room. Naruto sat on the bed and gave Yugao a grin that showed off some of his canines. It's my Hanyu form, Yugao-chan. Are you satisfied now? Naruto asked, and Yugao quickly turned her head to see how Shizune was handling it, but to her amazement, Shizune was perfectly fine and continued to smile. Sure, Naruto-kun, just take it down a notch now. I'm having some trouble standing up at the moment, Yugao had to admit, and Naruto nodded. He hanged the fox ears and his tail along with most of his features except his height. Naruto then helped Yugao to her feet and the Anbu side. I see it wasn't baseless after all, but why are you keeping yourself hanged? Yugao asked, and it was Naruto's turn to sigh. This wasn't going to be easy to explain, especially to an Anbu. He knew this involved a risk, and Naruto wasn't entirely convinced that Yugao would give up Konoha just for his cause. He knew he would have to tell her sooner or later, and while he would have preferred the later, a part of him wanted to tell Yugao, but then he still wasn't sure how she would react. However, luck wasn't with Naruto today, as Jiraiya came through the door also along with Tayuya. Mind filling us in also, Naruto? Jiraiya asked in a tone that said this was non-negotiable with them. Well, in retrospect, Jiraiya couldn't get Naruto to do anything. When you have the power to surpass a cage, well, there's not that many things you could force someone to do, but Naruto felt that they should know. If worst came to worst, then he and Shizune would have to fight and kill them, and the blonde really hoped that it wouldn't come to that. Sigh. Alright then. I might as well tell this to everyone. So get comfortable, cause this is going to be a long story, Naruto told them. Jiraiya nodded and leaned up against the wall. Tayuya narrowed her eyes and stood next to the side of the bed, and Yugao grabbed an armchair and sat down. Well, let's get this over with, Naruto thought before he heard another voice. I'm right behind you, Naruto-kun. It's not like they could stop us anyway. I'll even show them an alternate way of persuasion, Shizune thought while an evil grin came across her face. Naruto mentally chuckled and nodded. Thank you, Shizune-chan. Well, time to face the music, Naruto thought and turned to his three-person audience. Alright, I'll begin with Kumogakure, Chunin Exam Stadium. 3 days later. Naruto was right across from the wreckage and narrowed his eyes at the man. The stadium was packed with people, mostly Kumo civilians and shinobi, but that was to be expected. However, Naruto only saw Shizune, Tayuya and Jiraiya in the crowd, along with Yugito, Samui, Karui, Omoi, and Mabui. Sheesh, it like these people were making this a holiday. Naruto was just going to kick the wreckages, what was the big deal? Well, Gaki, are you ready to get started? Wreckage asked, flexing his muscles a bit. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the wreckage and sighed. He felt slightly depressed for some reason, but Shizune, Tayuya and Jiraiya knew why. I guess Yugao isn't showing up? Tayuya asked. Jiraiya sighed and rubbed the back of his head. Shizune sighed also while looking at the stadium. I don't know. It must have been a lot for her. You can tell Naruto-kun is still thinking about it. He lacking the normal confidence he exudes. I don't like seeing my Naruto-kun like that, Shizune said, and her sadness clearly showed. Jiraiya frowned also. He was in confusion about what to do with the information that he was given 3 days ago. You think the Naruto will be alright? Tayuya asked, and it confused the two when she used his name. Shizune looked at Tayuya, and so did Jiraiya in astonishment. Said redhead gave an embarrassed blush. What are you two looking at? I'm not worried about the shithead at all. But it's no fun messing with him when he's like this, Tayuya said with a small scowl. Despite the situation, Jiraiya and Shizune chuckled at Tayuya and her statement. You really care about Naruto-kun, don't you? Shizune asked. Tayuya's scowl deepened and Jiraiya patted the redhead's shoulder. It's as clear as this fight's ending, Jiraiya said, and that was the final hit. Tayuya balled her fists and started to scream. Shut up, you shitheads, before I kick both your asses. Tayuya yelled, making Shizune and Jiraiya laugh in spite of themselves at the moment. Naruto heard Tayuya's little outburst, as did the whole stadium, but for some reason it made him more calm. He actually had to smile when he heard Tayuya's voice. Wreckage seemed to notice that when he saw the blonde take a deep breath and casted a glare that completely commanded the word confidence. Some of the people were taken aback by Naruto's change in facial features, and it piqued the Wreckage's interest in the blonde. So did something good happen from that little outburst? You seem to have grown some balls now, Wreckage said, and Naruto smirked while rubbing a soft hand through his hair. Well, I just needed some time to collect myself. Now then. Naruto released some of his power, making his eyes go red and the chakra around him swirl violently as the wind picked up. Let's have our fun, Naruto told Wreckage. Everyone felt the slight chakra increase, but most didn't make a big deal of it. So you've got some fight in you after all, Raikage said, and Naruto gave a mysterious grin. You've got no idea what I've got, Naruto thought, and suddenly a dark-skinned man appeared in the middle of them and raised his hand. All right, I'm Darui. I guess I'm the proctor. This is one fight by knockout or forfeiture. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze of Konoha and Raikage Sama of Kumo. Begin, Darui yelled and immediately jumped back to clear the place. Naruto and Raikage didn't move for a bit and simply stared at each other, making the crowd go with anticipation. Shizune, Tayuya and Jiraiya gulped and waited for both shinobi to move, but neither did, and it was unnerving everyone. What are they doing? They haven't moved yet, Yugito said, but B was strangely quiet. Even Nibi wasn't her usual talkative self, until a minute ago. Kitten, watch those two closely. You might just witness something amazing happen, Nibi said, and Yugito raised an eyebrow, but nodded. She remembered how terrified she was when she ran into Shizune, and the brunette said Naruto was better than her, so Yugito settled for watching. However, she noticed that one of their groups was missing, but she ignored it and turned back to the fight. Naruto breathed deep and then gave a simple sigh. All right, let's get started, Naruto said and dropped his arms. At the action, Raikage raised an eyebrow, but then Naruto surprised the crowd as he instantly disappeared and immediately slammed his fist into Raikage's face. Naruto grinned, but not from the hit. He knew Raikage could have avoided that hit, but took it anyway as a measure of power. Naruto jumped back and cracked his knuckles while Raikage rubbed the side of his cheek. Not bad, Gaki. At least you can give a decent hit. Now then, let's start, Raikage said, charging at Naruto. The blonde nodded and added chakra to his feet before dashing off towards the Raikage. The crowd tensed when the two shinobi slammed into each other. Raikage let out a punch, but Naruto ducked under it and aimed his own punch at Raikage's chiseled stomach. Raikage saw the hit coming and twisted his body, making Naruto miss his initial target, but the blonde wasn't done as he pivoted his foot to realign himself and aimed one of his kicks towards Raikage's face. The leader of Kumo grabbed the blonde Hanyu's foot and effortlessly threw him across the field. Naruto grinned and backflipped and landed with a skid, surprising most of the people in the stadium. Well, at least he's not as weak as we thought, Karui said, making Omoi nod. Samui remained stoic and didn't say anything, but Yugito and B saw more. He successfully dodged each hit and was able to counter accordingly to the response that Raikage-sama gave. Both were equal in surprise, but Naruto got the biggest jump on Raikage-sama. It starts now, Yugito thought, making sure she saw everything. Meanwhile, Tayuya and Jiraiya were impressed with Naruto, but knew that the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Shizune had a grin on her face from the fight already. You just have to play with him, Naruto-kun. Shizune wondered as Naruto cracked his neck and Raikage cracked his knuckles. Well, at least you can keep up, but it won't last long, Raikage said and shot at Naruto. Naruto barely had time to react as he was slammed in the face by the Raikage and was sent flying into a wall. Naruto managed a rebound and landed on the wall's edge, but when he looked up, he saw the Raikage was gone and quickly turned his head to see said man behind him with the same grin. Brats like you need to learn their place, Raikage said and quickly punched Naruto in the stomach, making the blonde get the wind knocked out of him, but it wasn't done as Raikage sent his other fist at Naruto's face, slamming the blonde into the ground below. Most of the people cheered and others wondered about the fight resulting in Naruto's death, but to Shizune, everyone was pathetic. They didn't know anything. They should be more concentrated on enjoying this little display, cause when it gets started, it sure as hell will get started. Naruto coughed from the dust and before long, he was brought into a vice grip by the Raikage, who lifted his small body of the ground. Naruto gritted his teeth while some people wondered how the fight was over already. You said I'm weak. Well, look at you. I haven't even begun to get serious yet, Raikage said, and Naruto gave a painful chuckle. Oh, is that right? Well, that's good. I thought I might have won too easily, Naruto said, and everyone immediately gasped. The blonde had such a mouth to say that to the Raikage. Everyone thought he was downright insane. And what makes you think you can beat me? Raikage asked, and Naruto was more than happy to reply. Well, other than the fact I haven't even warmed up yet as one, but the other, well, we'll get to that one later, Naruto said with a poof. Raikage raised an eyebrow at the action. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Raikage thought, and suddenly the air became slightly more tense for everyone as chakra was released. Raikage looked around, but didn't find Naruto, and the blonde was more than happy for it to stay that way. What's the matter, Raikage? Can't you find me? Naruto's voice echoed through the stadium, making people shiver at the tone of his voice. Come out, Gaki. Take your punishment like a man, Raikage yelled out, and Naruto chuckled. You call that punishment? I thought you were holding back, but since you seem to be in a hurry, I'll make this quick, Naruto said, and suddenly a shadow appeared over Raikage. The man looked up and saw Naruto with the biggest grin on his face and a blue sphere in his hand. Raikage widened his eyes when the ball started to grow in size and the audience gasped at the sight of it. Udama Rasengan, Naruto yelled and slammed it into the ground, causing it to shatter to pieces. Raikage managed to avoid the ball in the nick of time and waited for the dust to settle. When he saw Naruto's figure in the smoke, the man wasted no time and went through his own hand signs, making his hand cackle with lightning. The Raikage smirked as the dust settled and Naruto turned to see the lightning in the Raikage's hand. It's over now, Gaki, Raikage said as he ran at Naruto. The crowd was in an uproar over the two, and Naruto immediately gathered wind around his body. Seeing the swirling winds, the Raikage smirked at Naruto's knowledge that Raiden Chakra was weak to Fuden Chakra, but he didn't give up and neared Naruto even more. But the blonde wasn't gonna let the Raikage have his way in the fight as he concentrated the chakra to the entire arm on his right. Naruto then ran at the Raikage with a grin across his face, and the two immediately clashed with a bang. Yugo slashed at a rock, splitting it in half and making it crumble. She had been in that spot for a few hours and was still utterly pissed. She just didn't know what to believe anymore. After what Naruto told her, how could she? Damn it, why am I so pissed off today? Yugo wondered as she laid on the ground with her sword still in her hands. She closed her eyes when she remembered that conversation they all had 3 days ago. Flashback 3 days ago. And that's why I have to do it along with my family. I won't let anyone stop me from doing it either, Naruto said to them. Shocking Jiraiya, Yugo and Tayuya. Shizune just stood there with a sad expression while she looked at the ground. Yugao nearly fell from her chair and Jiraiya's complexion paled when he heard the things that Naruto talked about. Tayuya remained speechless, which was a new one for everyone, but she was the one to speak first. And what the makes you think that you could even attempt that? Orochimaru tried to same thing with us, and in case your shit for brains forgot, well, Orochimaru lost his hands and that plan ended up in failure. Kami, you're such a shithead, Tayuya said, and Naruto's eyebrow twitched. He then exuded a serious ki that made everyone drop to their knees. Naruto turned to Tayuya with a fierce gaze that could even rival Kyuubi's. And do you want to know the reason that bastard Sannin failed? It's because he wanted to invade Konoha and make it his. I'm going to destroy Konoha. Burn it to the ground, make it crumble, split it in two, whatever the hell you want me to say, Naruto told them and released his ki, allowing them to breath. Naruto, revenge isn't the answer to your problem. Don't had me that crap, Jiraiya. Naruto yelled out, shocking the Sannin at the blonde's tone and his use of the man's actual name. This showed Naruto was all too serious. The only reason you can say that is because you haven't been through what I have. Frankly, the only people who can relate to me are Tayuya-chan and Yugao-chan. Shizune-chan can, of course, but she knows that. Tell me, Jiraiya, would you be able to stay in allegiance to your village after its cage and civilians beat your child to death and all you could do was watch? What about if all your friends were to die because of one person's selfish attitude of trying to conquer the entire nations in his name? Naruto asked, and Jiraiya stalled. Yugao stiffened and Tayuya looked at the ground. Whoever this guy was, he sounded like Orochimaru in every sense of the word. Naruto, regardless of that, to say you're going to destroy Konoha is downright insane, Jiraiya said and unconsciously went for a kunai, but before he could grab it, Shizune appeared behind Jiraiya and held his wrist tight, not even letting it move an inch. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Jiraiya, Shizune said with a smile that made Jiraiya sweat. Naruto then turned to Tayuya and narrowed his eyes at her. Besides that, Tayuya-chan, that damn snake never had what it took anyway, but I do. That's why I'm gonna. Why? Naruto paused to see Yugao in tears for the first time since the last mission they went on together. This wasn't what Naruto wanted. He didn't want to see any of his lovers sad, but he had to do this. Why what? Naruto asked. Yugao quickly stood to her feet and drew her sword and pointed it at Naruto. Everyone tensed, but Naruto and he could see the tears in her eyes fall to the floor. Why did you have to tell me that? Now I have to stop you as an Anbu of Konoha. Naruto-kun, why can't you just say it was a joke? Yugao asked and Naruto looked at the ground. Shizune and Jiraiya stayed to one side of the room and Tayuya stayed to the other. The floor was entirely for Naruto and Yugao. Naruto saw Yugao's hand on the sword shaking or rather quivering. Anbu were supposed to be emotionless and lethal when such information was presented to them, but Yugao couldn't do it. She could bear the thought of losing another lover, and if she did, she was sure that she wouldn't fall for anyone ever again. I'm not going to lie to you, Yugao-chan. I care for you and everyone else, but if you're going to try and kill me, Naruto suddenly poofed and then stood the older Naruto, but still his fox features were hanged so as not to prove he was more of a threat than normal. He then stood to his feet and walked up to Yugao. The Anbu stiffened and before she knew it, Naruto's neck was touching the tip of her sword and Yugao widened her eyes. I won't stop you from trying then, Naruto finished and Yugao looked into his blue eyes. Naruto waited for the purple-haired Anbu to just immediately shove her sword through his throat in an attempt to kill him, but he was surprised when Yugao just stared at him. Shizune had already released Jiraiya's hand, but the Sannin couldn't move. It was like the situation demanded that he not move or something bad would happen. Tayuya was on the edge of her seat. The story she heard from Naruto about the future sounded so skeptical it had to be a lie, but something about the blonde himself exuded truth that they just couldn't deny. Not to mention, there was something about this Naruto that Tayuya liked. The not taking shit from anyone and being able to deal it back type of thing. It made her respect for Naruto grow slightly and even brought the faintest of blushes across her face. Meanwhile, Yugao continued to remain still, but Naruto broke the silence. Yugao-chan, it's your sworn duty to protect Konoha, right? From all types of danger, right? Naruto asked and Yugao simply nodded, not seeing where this was going. So what if that danger is the Hokage and its people? Believe it or not, Yugao-chan, but Konoha is going to become the main reason for war in the world. I'm saying this to you too, Jiraiya, Naruto stated and the two were silent. Yugao couldn't speak. She couldn't think. She just couldn't do anything. Yugao suddenly dropped her sword and left the room without saying a word. Naruto sighed and simply looked at the ground. Today just wasn't his day. Flashback end. Yugao looked up at the cloudy sky and she felt her anger leaving. She had her duties as an Anbu, but if what Naruto said was correct, then exactly what was she using those skills for? Would she only be helping to clear the obstacles that Konoha would face in the future? Damn it, Naruto-kun, why did you have to tell me that? Why isn't this easy? The choice should be clear. I should be against Naruto-kun even if I love him. Konoha comes first, Yugao said, but her voice trailed off into nothingness as she looked at the clouds. That's right. I'm an Anbu of Konoha and I have a duty to my village. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, but my village is more important than my feelings for you. I must fight you, Yugao said and got to her feet to find Naruto and remembered the fight. She quickly clutched her sword and vanished in a shunshin. Yugao appeared on the edge of the Chunin exam stadium and watched the fight, but it shocked her. Naruto seemed exhausted. His clothes were a mess, but his body was fine. Across from him was a panting Raikage who seemed to be a little worse for wear. Yugao decided to watch the fight and take out the blonde when he was exhausted. She would hate herself later, but now wasn't the time. Naruto and Raikage squared off against each other and the blonde charged back at the man. Raikage pivoted his foot and dodged the blonde's move, but he didn't see the foot that Naruto had as the blonde slammed it into the man's face, sending the Raikage into a stadium wall with a loud crash. The crowd was left speechless. No matter how hard the Raikage fought, Naruto just wouldn't stay down and his body didn't seem the least bit injured. Is he immortal or something? Karui wondered and the same question occupied everyone else's thoughts. Tayuya and Jiraiya watched the match with extreme interest and Shizune had an amused grin on her face. The entire stadium was cheering for the two, but it was then that lightning cackled even louder than before and Naruto turned to the source. Alright Gaki, no more playing. I'm going to be serious from here on end, Raikage said with his body fully covered in Raiden chakra. Naruto narrowed his eyes and smirked. Just what I want, Raikage. Now then, let's continue, Naruto said and before he realized it, he slammed into a wall and a fury of punches was unleashed in him, digging the blonde into the stadium walls even more. Everyone winced at the method and Yugao felt her heart tug slightly. Yugito widened her eyes wondering if Naruto was right along with Tayuya and Jiraiya. When Raikage stopped his assault, he grabbed Naruto by the shoulders and raised the blonde above his head. Everyone gasped as some people wondered if such an attack should have been used on a simple Jonin. Yugito widened her eyes in horror as did everyone else. Raiga Bomu, Liger Bomb, Raikage yelled and slammed Naruto headfirst into the ground resulting in a major impact on the stadium floor. The dust picked up and covered the entire portion of the battleground. Everyone waited with bated breath for the result and Yugao for once wanted to know if Naruto was alright. And not that she cared since she would kill him when the match was over. The dust dissipated and the stadium fully showed Raikage above a flattened Naruto who laid on the ground motionless. Jiraiya, Tayuya, Yugito, and Yugao widened their eyes and Raikage looked at the unconscious blonde. His lightning armor dissipated also and he huffed. Try and get up now, Gaki. I'm more than suited to protect Yugito. You're good, but not that good, Raikage said walking away. Everyone figured Naruto was dead since no Kumo record had come from anyone surviving that attack. Yugao was worried completely. Naruto wasn't moving, his eyes were closed and he just wouldn't get up. Naruto always got up. He never lost. Why the hell was he staying down? Yugao clenched her sword and jumped into the stadium stairs. Tayuya, Jiraiya, and Shizune were surprised that the Anbu was there or rather that she was walking towards until she came up to a railing and saw Naruto still unconscious. For some reason it pissed Yugao off and she wouldn't stand for it. The woman suddenly screamed startling everyone. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, get up right now. I won't help with your ambition. Yugao screamed out making people whisper and give small remarks about her attitude. Tayuya and Jiraiya widened their eyes at her proclamation and Shizune smiled warmly. Yugao just admitted that Naruto was more important to her than Konoha. Naruto's eyes twitched and a smile came across his face. He wasn't sure if Yugao was just saying that or if she meant it, but he was happy nonetheless. Raikage raised an eyebrow at the woman and sighed. He's done. If he's not dead, then he needs serious medical attention. He won't be getting up, Raikage said and some people shouted agreeing with him and insulted Yugao for having a merciless heart and tell Naruto to keep fighting, but everyone stopped when the air became toxic. It was hard for anyone to breathe, but strangely Yugao, Tayuya and Jiraiya were fine. Everyone else was nearly on the floor trying to get a breath of air. Yugito and B coped, but they were having trouble too. Nibi, what's going on? Yugito asked and Nibi widened her eyes. This fight isn't over, kitten. Not by a long shot, Nibi said and everyone saw the chakra swirling around Naruto. Raikage turned to see the blonde slowly stand to his feet and his smile was demonic. It made the air sick. Raikage noticed that Naruto was taller and his hair was more spiky looking. His bangs came down his face and his eyes glowed with a red fire that could shake anyone's soul. Everyone widened their eyes at the change, but Yugao smiled. She had to smile. She wasn't sure why she was smiling, but she didn't care. She was just happy that Naruto was up. I'm not done with you. Naruto yelled out making his voice deeper and Raikage had to sweat slightly at the blonde's use of chakra. What is he? Raikage wondered and soon the injuries that adorned Naruto's body healed and the blonde was back on his face. Now then, I'll show you my speed, Naruto said vanishing. Raikage gasped, but it didn't last long as Naruto slammed his fist into Raikage's face. The man gasped as the hit wasn't like the others. It felt like being hit with a lariat 2x. Raikage was sent flying and backflipped then activated his lightning armor. He saw Naruto walking over to him and he quickly charged at the blonde. Play time is over. I'm the fastest man alive, Raikage yelled, but his fist didn't connect to Naruto, but the blonde's fist connected to his stomach. Raikage gasped from the hit and Naruto grinned. Let's kick it up a notch, Dadbayo, Naruto said and made 3 cage bunchins. The first Naruto kicked Raikage into the air and before he could rebound, the second slammed him in the back and sent him to the third. The pressure of each hit was antagonizing for the Raikage and people watched in horror, shock, and wonder at the blonde's actions. Karui had her mouth hanging along with Omoi. Samui's eyes were widened along with Yugito. Shizune's grin deepened while Jiraiya and Tayuya watched everything. The third Naruto reverse kicked Raikage into a stadium wall making it give a loud crash. Naruto breathed and dispelled his clones while waiting for Raikage to appear. Almost immediately the man came out in a fierce yell and Naruto grinned. Raikage was moving fast and almost collided with Naruto's neck in a lariat, but the blonde managed to duck under it in time and dashed away from Raikage, but not before placing a Hiraishin seal on the man's upper forearm and backflipped away. All right, Raikage. Let's end it now, Naruto said, dropping to all four. Raikage grinned with a nod and his lightning armor was in full blast. The audience watched in shock as the two dashed towards each other. Raikage let out his fist at Naruto's face, but it surprised him when Naruto smirked and a sense of deja vu hit the Raikage when the blonde disappeared in a yellow lightning. Raikage wasn't able to maneuver in time as Naruto appeared behind him. The blonde held out his hand and formed a Rasengan in his hand. Raikage gasped at the blue sphere, but he was still in mid-strike so he couldn't avoid it. It was fun while it lasted, Raikage, Naruto said, and in a quick motion, he slammed Rasengan into Raikage's back. The Raikage felt the pressure of the Rasengan on his body as he was pressed into the ground by the blonde. Asuku Rasengan, pressurized spiraling sphere, Naruto yelled out, and the Rasengan, due to being compressed too much, expanded and kicked up the dust, causing a massive explosion. Everyone had to cover their eyes from the pressure and it lasted for a few minutes. For those few minutes, no one could see anything, but then the dust dissipated and people could finally see. Everyone gasped when they saw the Raikage unconscious on the field. Naruto seemed to be smiling and scratched the back of his head. Was that too much? Naruto asked, and then Darui came to the field. Darui checked for a pulse from the Raikage and nodded. He turned to Naruto in slight shock, but didn't let it show much. The winner by knockout is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, Darui yelled out, and people were silent for a second, but then quickly erupted in cheers. Well, most wear cheers, others wear mourns that their beloved Raikage lost. Naruto sighed and made his way to the exit of the stadium. He came to see Yugao, Shizune, Tayuya and Jiraiya all smiling at him. It was more evident in Yugao though. Naruto grinned with his tattered clothes and walked towards the group only to be met with a hug from Yugao, who was crying. Don't scare me like that. I lost Hayate-kun. Please don't leave me alone, Naruto-kun, Yugao pleaded, and Naruto looked down at her. Yugao was too honest for her own good, but that's what made her a good woman in Naruto's eyes. Naruto cupped Yugao's cheeks and smiled. I'm not going anywhere, Yugao-chan, as long as you stay with me, I'll be there for you forever, Naruto told her. Yugao gave a smile and nodded. She wasn't sure if it was right for her to let Naruto live, knowing he was going to destroy Konoha, and with the information that Naruto told her, she wasn't sure about her choices, but Yugao was allowed to wait. Naruto respected her enough to at least give her that. I'm gonna be sick, Tayuya said, making Yugao chuckled along with Naruto. The blonde then smiled and made his way to Tayuya and gave her a hug, making the redhead gasp. Did Tayuya-chan worry about me? Naruto asked, and Tayuya gritted her teeth with a small blush. Get the hell off me, shithead, before I kick your. Tayuya screamed, and everyone chuckled before walking off with smiles on their faces. It was almost like the conversation from 3 days ago never happened. Raikage Mansion 2 days later. Naruto and his group appeared in front of the desk of the Raikage again and smiled when they saw Yugito with him. Raikage massaged his jaw and chuckled. You hit hard, kid. That's good. It seems that you are the right choice to protect Yugito. I'm still suspicious, but I'll trust you. For now, Kumo and the Namikaze clan have an alliance, Raikage said, and Naruto nodded with a bit of thanks. Yugito had most of her stuff sealed and she was ready to go. She had said her goodbyes long ago. Yugito smiled at her new company and the six walked off. You seem happy, Nibi replied. Yugito blushed and the group of 6 left the Kumo gates. I suppose I am. Aren't you happy also? Yugito mentally asked. Nibi shrugged her shoulders and grinned. I suppose having such a kami near you would make you happy. Well, I hope to have my own time with him soon, Nibi said and faded into the seal. Well, is everyone ready to go? Naruto asked, turning to Shizune, Jiraiya and Tayuya, who nodded with their own grins. He then turned to Yugito and Yugao, who nodded also. All right, you guys, let's go. We have a lot of work to do over the next 2 years, Naruto told them. Everyone nodded and quickly disappeared into the mountains and ran off to whatever destination they had planned. In 2 years, everything in Konoha's walls that Naruto hasn't deemed worth saving will be destroyed, and it will be on the night that the moon bleeds its little red heart out. 2 years later, all of Konoha was happy. In 2 years it had managed to rebuild from the damage that had happened in the last invasion attempt. People soon forgot the terrors that they witnessed that night. However, this wasn't an ordinary night. Some people noted the color of the moon. It was blood red instead of pure white. Most found it ominous, but others saw it as pure beauty. No one could ever suspect that the moon was actually a signal. It was the last moon anyone would see that night. In 2 years, the Namikaze compound was ready. They had plotted and planned. They got stronger, if that was even possible, but nonetheless it was ready. Naruto wasn't back yet, but he had contacted Mai Terumi and Yagura for the invasion. With Yagura's help, Odo had become a major nation in 2 years. It could have been considered the 6 great nations, but after tonight there would be no point at all. Yagura and Mai had also become village allies under Naruto and his clan. Yagura also got his dragon summon, which was obviously water. In those 2 years, Naruto had gotten closer to Mai, Yugito, and Yugao. He definitely had plenty of fun with all 3 of them, and those 3 absolutely loved him. Naruto even released Nibi from Yugito's seal, and the Biju was more than happy to express her gratitude to Naruto for saving her. The blonde had marked Yugito, Mai, and Yugao on his trip, and they were made as a part of his clan. Naturally, the others at the compound knew about it, but certainly didn't mind at all. Also Konan, about a year ago, had been opening herself up more and even trusted in Naruto's version of peace. She was marked also by the blonde when she was told to give the blonde some documents. Konan still worried about Akatsuki and what they would do, but Naruto assured her that it was alright. Even Makoto had become a Hanyu, and so did Tayuya. Granted, the redhead was still a foul mouth, she was still very much appreciated. If anything, her cursing increased, which made Naruto wonder if that was a trait or something like that. Jiraiya had been quite neutral to Naruto's cause about a year ago. He really wasn't going to help, but a talk from Minato, Tsunade, and Kushina sort of swayed him a bit. He told Naruto that he'd gather intel on Konoha, but he just couldn't bring himself to actually help destroy it. Naruto could understand at least that much and thanked Jiraiya for it. Fu had admittedly come to love Naruto also. She really saw him as a unique kind of person to her. Her never being a part of Konoha fully, she had a bit of indifference as to what actually happened to it. Granted, she wasn't a Hanyu, but she seemed to like the idea of not dying if it meant that she could stay as a Namikaze clan member. Ayame decided to wait for her opinion to be a Hanyu. She did love Naruto, but the idea of being a half-demon sort of scared her a bit. As it also turned out, Kiba had even managed to get some more allies. It was risky at first, but he told Tenten, Neji, Shikamaru, Shino, and Hinata about it. He told Lee also, but the green-clad taijutsu user didn't buy Kiba's story and called him unyouthful for thinking such things. Tenten seemed sad that Naruto would hide some of this stuff from her, but seeing it from his point of view she could understand. Neji, Shino, Shikamaru, and Hinata were slightly off about it. Everyone really loved their village, but if that was the future, then was it worth it to stay in that kind of future? Shino and Shikamaru had tried to state that since they now knew, then it would be easier to avoid that future, but Kiba told them that whether they knew it or not, Naruto would take out Konoha, so it wouldn't have mattered if they did know. It took time for those 4, but they relented and joined. Granted, they weren't going to be Hanyu, but they would definitely try to save Konoha from the future it was headed in. Everything was ready. They spent 3 years going through this, and it was finally time. Naruto, Jiraiya, Shizune, Yugao, and Tayuya were walking back to Konoha, simply enjoying the silence for a bit longer. Shizune's attire hadn't really changed much over the years. She was taller than her genin days, but she was also much better looking. Yugao was the same also. She hadn't changed much either, though her attire was different. Gone was the Anbu armor that she normally wore, and in its place was black battle kimono with shin guards on each of her arms and legs. She was wearing a small headband underneath her kimono. It was a Konoha headband, but there was a clean slash through it. Tayuya simply wore her old Sound 4 clothes and kept on her Odo headband. Yugito also wore her regular clothes, which a majority of it was purple. Her attire hadn't really changed over the 2 years at all. It's today, isn't it, Naruto-kun? Yugao asked, licking her lips. Naruto chuckled with a nod. Meanwhile, Shizune cracked her knuckles and casted her red, slitted eyes on the sight of Konoha. They were still quite a distance, so Konoha was small looking. I'll rip out their insides and kill them all. I'll make them pay, Shizune said with a sudden scowl. Naruto narrowed his eyes and everyone continued to walk towards Konoha. Behind them and hidden quite well was Yagura and some of his Odo shinobi. Behind that was the beautiful Mei Terumi and most of her Kiri forces. Naruto told them to stay back as they waited. It was going to start now. The fun, the blood and the sweet smell of revenge was gonna fill the air of the night. Meanwhile, the Namikaze compound was in a complete uproar. Kushina and Zabuza laughed as they saw everyone running around and getting their things together. It didn't take long for everyone to assemble across the house. Shikamaru was sitting with Kushina and Zabuza going over some things. Everyone else was now awaiting their commands. Thanks to Shikamaru, they had planned for every contingency, but everyone wanted to go on a rampage. For some reason, the sight of the blood-red moon made their demon blood boil to an exciting state. All right, is everyone ready? Kushina asked. Everyone nodded and immediately walked out the door. Anko and Kurenai were the same team as last time, but now it was going to be good. They could go all out and not have to worry about anything. Haku, Kin, and Kiba were another team as usual. The three worked really well together, so this was good for them. Neji, Shino, Shikamaru, and Hinata were held to being support for everyone else, which they protested, but it wasn't much of a fight. Minato, Tsunade and Fu went to the Hokage mansion as planned and got to the best part. To simply wait for the carnage to begin. Makoto and Kushina reformed and became their own tag team. And lastly, Konan was with Hana and Sum and the three left also. The only ones left in the room were Ayame and Chuki at the moment. Well, San, it seems that we made the right choice, I think, Ayame said with a small grin. Chuki chuckled and stared, working over the sink to wash dishes. After what Naruto has been through, I have no doubt. I have to say that being the cook for a group of Hanyu is amazing. And everyone isn't nearly as bad as people say they are, Chuki replied, making Ayame slightly laugh with a nod. As everyone entered the woods, Zabuza brought everyone together. Naruto has give us his plans. We have all decided to follow him and we hold no regrets. We do his wishes for him and it will be completed. Everyone go and wreak havoc. Zabuza yelled, making his voice demonic. Everyone cheered out in the woods and all walked towards the unsuspecting village. Kushina and Makoto entered into one of Konoha's sections and saw all the people walking around and conversing. Never thought you'd turn on Konoha, would you? Makoto asked and Kushina chuckled. No, I didn't, but my Sochi is more important to me. I'll be damned before they hurt him, Kushina answered, making Makoto nod. I know the feeling. When Fugaku wanted to overthrow Konoha, I was distressed also, Makoto said, looking at the ground. Kushina turned to her friend and simply gave her a small smile. Well, since you aren't a shinobi of Konoha, I'd think that you can make your decision now, Kushina said, and Makoto nodded. They stopped in the crowd full of people and nodded to each other. Kushina walked towards one group of people and Makoto walked towards the other. Hey people, mind if I ask you a question? Kushina asked. The group simply nodded with smiles at the redhead as Kushina showed her canines and her claws. The redhead in a burst of speed zipped past them all as she slashed them apart. It was all done in silence as each body fell to the ground. Kushina's hands dripped in blood and she smirked. Can you die for me? Kushina asked, and suddenly she heard a scream. It was a really loud scream that brought everyone to her attention. Kushina grinned and cracked her knuckles. The street was instantly flooded with a ki that made people choke as they dropped to the floor. Someone managed to look up at Kushina, and the glare he got scared the shit out of him. Kushina's eyes were blood red as the moon. Her body leaked ki and her eyes screamed death to them all. I'll have my fun with all of you, Kushina said, dashing forward. She quickly took on Civilian by the throat as she ran through the crowd of people with her claws tearing through one person after the other. Kushina stopped momentarily to crush the man's windpipe. She crushed it so hard that the sounds could be heard throughout the streets. Suddenly people started to run away from the mad woman and Kushina grinned as she stopped her vice grip on the man's throat. It's not over yet. As my Sochi wants, none of you will leave this village alive, Kushina said and quickly ran after the screaming people. Meanwhile, Makoto was making people scream also. Her Sharingan flared at all the villagers and made a few hand signs. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Makoto yelled and sent a blazing fireball at the people. Some people managed to dodge the fireball, but those unlucky enough were burned alive as the fireball exploded inside a building, bringing the whole thing in flames. What the hell is wrong with you? Someone yelled. Makoto looked up at the blood moon and grinned before casting her gaze upon the villagers who didn't have the common sense to run, not that it would have mattered. You asked the wrong question, Makoto said, making some of the villagers look at her weirdly. It's not what's wrong with me. It's what's so right with me, Makoto said, deciding not to beat around the bush and unhinged her fox features. People gasped and immediately backed away from Makoto like she was going to massacre all of them, which she was. Makoto dashed forward and slammed her fist into someone's face, making the entire skull that protected the head to completely snap. Her fist made the person fly through a building, causing a loud crash. The screams of the villagers came out as they ran away. Makoto grinned and cracked her knuckles. Strangely, this is music to my ears, Makoto said, and quickly ran at the villagers. She quickly lunged for another person, but she stopped when a kunai came between her and the villagers. Halt. You are under arrest and you'll be apprehended right now, a chunin said and drew a kunai at Makoto. Said female Uchiha grinned as she felt her blood rush to a new height. Finally, some entertainment. I'll be more than happy to send you to the Shinigami, Makoto said, and before the chunin could realize it, his chest was pierced by Makoto's hand as the woman gave a demonic smile. The chunin fell to the ground and coughed up some blood while Makoto glared at him. How disappointing, Makoto said as she slammed her hand through the man's skull, making him slump to the floor dead. Makoto brought her hand out and noticed the fragments of brains in his skull over her hand. She then effortlessly swiped it off and walked off. There were more people to kill and plenty of lives to ruin. Over in another part of Konoha, Zabuza was surrounded by 3 jonin who scowled at him. Zabuza grinned as he clutched his sword. He'd never felt this bloodthirsty in his life. He felt like he was reliving his days at the demon hidden in the mist. I knew we shouldn't have trusted your Zabuza. How dare you attack Konoha? A jonin yelled and Zabuza grinned. It was then that one comment sent the man over the edge. I knew that damn demon made a stupid mistake. Now we have to suffer for his stupidity, another jonin said to himself, but then Zabuza's ki rose to a new level of fear and terror. What do you assholes know about Naruto? Don't go badmouthing the Gaki while I'm here, Zabuza snarled, making the jonin glare at him. Of course the demon of the mist would protect that demon brat. So what are you going to do if I do badmouth the brat? As soon as the jonin said that, Zabuza dashed forward and did what his sword was made for. He guillotined the jonin as the man's head popped off and the blood sprayed from his headless body, showering Zabuza's body in the man's blood. That's what I'm gonna do, Zabuza answered, and then the jonin quickly shortened the distance between themselves and quickly stabbed Zabuza in the back. Zabuza widened his eyes as he felt the pain of the kunai in his back. The 2 jonin grinned, but it stopped as Zabuza turned to them with one sick, twisted smile. Is that all you got? Zabuza asked the surprised jonin. With a small pivot of his foot, Zabuza made a clean slash across one of their throats. It was so fast that neither jonin was able to react in time as the blood sprayed out for his throat. You demon. I'll kill you, the other jonin said, but then Zabuza was grinning, but this grin was different. It was a more twisted grin. The mark of a demon hellbent on giving a massacre. Not before I kill you, Zabuza said, and with a quick motion, he severed the man's head so fast that the man's expression wasn't even one of shock, just pure confusion. Zabuza raised his leg over the man's face and crushed it like it was an insect and lifted his foot up with some of the sticky blood coming up with it. HMPH, so pathetic, Zabuza said, running off. He turned his head to the side and immediately saw a small fire on the north side of Konoha. The demon of the mist narrowed his eyes with a glare and smirk that would make even Orochimaru cringe. Hurry up, Gaki. You're not going to have anything at this rate, Zabuza said to himself, and then he was flocked by 4 more jonin. He grabbed his sword and glared at all of them. Let's get started, Zabuza said, charging at his ex-comrades. Tsunade, Fu, and Minato watched and heard the people screaming outside, and it unnerved Minato slightly, but the man didn't do anything. He wouldn't why he wasn't stopping this, but he felt his heart harden and he shielded his emotions from view. Tsunade and Fu seemed to notice, but didn't say anything about it. It was then that a jonin slammed through the door and quickly bowed to Tsunade. Hokage-sama, the village is under attack. It seems Zabuza Momochi, Sume Inuzuka, Hana Inuzuka, and Kushina Uzumaki have betrayed us. They're attacking the village right now. Along with them are 3 of our Chunin, Haku Momochi, Kiba Inuzuka, and Kin Suchi. We aren't sure, but rumors are saying that Anko and Kurenai are with them also. Please give us your orders, the Jonin said to her. Fu and Minato turned to Tsunade, who was looking out the window. She had a small smile on her face and got up from her seat. When she walked over to the Jonin, she patted him on the shoulders. It's all right. We'll handle this like we always do. Now here is my first and last order to you, Tsunade said, with the last part being in her thoughts. Tsunade's right hand glowed and she slammed the Jonin in the back of his neck, severing his spinal column. The man yelled out in pain, but before it could fully go out, Tsunade sent her fist at his face, blasting the Jonin through the Hokage mansion. Fu and Minato's sweat dropped while Tsunade smirked. Well, I'm going. I guess I won't need this anymore, Tsunade said, removing the word fifth from her green jacket. She then looked at the enormous amount of paperwork and cracked her knuckles. Tsunade slammed the piles of paper out the window while Fu raised an eyebrow and Minato sighed. I've always wanted to do that at least once, Tsunade said as she jumped on the ledge of the window. She then jumped out the window and ran off towards the action or something like that. Fu sighed and so did Minato. Should we be going too? Fu asked. Minato gave his response by grabbing Fu and using the Hiraishin. They disappeared from view. In another part of Konoha, Anko and Kurenai were engaged in a fight with 2 shinobi. It felt ironic that of all people to fight, it had to be Guy and Asuma again. Both were shocked when they saw the bloody, red streets of Konoha. The smell of human remains littered across the village. It made Asuma actually puke from the horror of it all. Guy seemed to be queasy, but he handled it better. Both were even more shocked when they saw Anko and Kurenai smiling as they killed civilians. Anko would tear and slash at people's faces, bringing their screams to the surface of their voice, making all of Konoha know the pain that they were inflicting. Anko, why have you done this most unyouthful act? Guy asked and Anko grinned. She stood in the blood-filled streets and glared at Guy long and hard before walking towards him. Guy unconsciously backed up and then threw a kunai at Anko and it grazed her cheek. Anko stopped and flicked the blood from her wound. She looked at it and then Guy. What's the matter, Guy? Aren't you going to fight me? The full moon in blood. It makes a Hanyu's blood boil. Isn't that right, Nai-chan? Anko asked and Kurenai looked at the blood splattered everywhere. She turned to Asuma and gave him a cold look that for some reason made Asuma almost blush. Well, I'd love to talk a bit longer, Asuma, but I think it's time that I settled what I started 2 years ago, Kurenai said, and Asuma raised an eyebrow at her. What does that mean? What did we do 2 years ago? Asuma asked. Kurenai and Anko grinned and before long the 2 Jonin completely unhinged their fox features, making Guy and Asuma hit the ground in horror. There was so much vile chakra that the 2 nearly passed out right then. Guy casted a glare at Anko and he immediately regretted it. Anko's gaze was intense. It was so serious and evil that Guy could literally feel his soul start to fade from the pressure Anko was putting on him. He couldn't hold his gaze long before he looked at the ground again. Why, you 2 are the ones who attacked the village 2 years ago? Asuma asked, reaching for his trench knives, but before he could reach them, Kurenai grabbed his left arm and held him in a submission position with his arm behind his back. Asuma winced at the pain while Kurenai lowered her gaze at him. That's right, Asuma-san. Now then, are you going to try and stop us? Kurenai asked with a glare that dared him to try it. Asuma narrowed his eyes at Kurenai, who kept her hold on his arm. Asuma could feel his bones snapping from Kurenai's hold. What could you have to gain from doing this? You're a Konoha shinobi, Kurenai. Asuma yelled and Kurenai used her free hand to brush her hair slightly. I do it all for Naruto-kun, but I don't feel like talking, so I guess I'll kill you now, Kurenai said, but before she could act on that statement, Guy suddenly shot up and kicked her across the face, sending Kurenai into a building. Anko sighed as the 2 Jonin stood to their feet and faced Anko. Well, I always did want that rematch, Guy. Now that the stage is set, the moon is out and Naruto-kun says this is the end, I want to be entertained, Anko said as she ran at Guy again. Naruto and the others, having walked for a few more minutes, finally made it to where they could see Konoha beginning to smoke. Naruto grinned and so did Shizune. Mei and Yagura came out from where they were hiding and turned to Naruto. So Naruto-kun, do we go now? Mei asked. Naruto nodded with a smile and Mei turned to her shinobi. She gave them the signal and all the Kiri shinobi ran towards Konoha. Likewise, Yagura did the same with Oto and the Oto shinobi headed for the village also. Meanwhile, Naruto and the others stayed in the hills a bit longer simply to enjoy the view of a burning Konoha. Well, let's get started. Shizune-chan. To Yuya-chan, Yugao-chan, Yugito-chan, why don't you go and help them? Naruto asked them. Yugao sighed and nodded. She was feeling rather anxious. Why she didn't know, but now she didn't really care. Yugao dashed off with Yuya and Yugito following her. Shizune-chan, do you remember our promise to Kyuubi? Naruto asked. Shizune grinned and looked at the smoking village. Her eyes reflected hatred, hurt, and pain. Slow and painful, right, Naruto-kun? I'll make that pink bitch scream when she returns. Now then, I think it's time we got going, Naruto-kun, Shizune said to her mate. Naruto nodded and he looked at the blood-red moon. His Hanyu blood boiled to its peak as he and Shizune raced after everyone else. Haku, Kin and Kiba tore up the red light district of Konoha and continued to spill the blood of the civilians as they seemed to be enjoying their fun. It was all too good to let loose and all their urges to go unhindered. Haku stabbed one civilian and watched the blood pour from his body onto her ice, tainting the pure white weapons into a bloody red color. Kiba's hands and body were slightly drenched in the blood of his victims and he seemed to be snarling at everyone. The place was littered with the dead and mutilated bodies of the Konoha civilians along with the shinobi who dared to fight them. Kin was really enjoying herself. Her hands were coated in blood and yet she wouldn't pay it any mind. Kin grabbed another victim's throat and effortlessly pierced through her stomach, making the hand come out through the woman's back. Kin grinned evilly and allowed the woman to drop to the floor. That takes care of this part. Any other parts? Kin asked. Haku and Kiba swiped the blood from their fingers and before long the entire village saw multiple people entering the war zone. Kiba and the others grinned when they saw Kiri and Oto shinobi charging into the place. It was a sign to them all that Naruto and Shizune were coming. Finally, I was getting worried they wouldn't show up, Kiba said as they saw Yugao running along the rooftops. I take it she joined us? Haku asked rhetorically. Kiba and Kin just nodded and quickly vanished towards any other civilians, but that plan was interrupted by a Chunin. One whom everyone was familiar with. Kiba-san, Kin-san, Haku-san. Why are you doing this? It was Lee. The three Chunin turned to him and Kiba slightly pushed Kin and Haku back. Girls, you go on ahead. I'll take care of this, Kiba said to them. Haku and Kin nodded then vanished, leaving Rock Lee to deal with Kiba. So Lee, how are you doing? I never thought you'd be here, Kiba said and Lee balled his fists. The Chunin quickly appeared in front of Kiba and slammed his fist in Kiba's face in a fit of anger, but the sight shocked him. Kiba smirked and quickly wiped off the blood from his chin. Not bad, Lee. Now let me show you mine, Kiba said, focusing some of his yuki into his fist. With a speed that even Lee couldn't do, Kiba slammed his fist into the Chunin's stomach and sent him to the ground in an instant. Why Kiba-san? How could you betray Konoha? Lee asked, clutching his stomach. Kiba narrowed his eyes at Lee and simply settled for staring at the second odd beast of Konoha. I already told you the story 1 year ago. You chose to leave. I'm sorry, Lee, but if you won't join us then, I'll kill you, Kiba said, turning his voice demonic, making Lee sweat. The Chunin, however, didn't back down and stood to his feet. I refuse, Kiba-san. I won't betray Konoha, Lee said, and Kiba closed his eyes. He really didn't want to kill Lee, no matter how annoying the guy was, but there was no helping it. Fine, Lee. You decided this for yourself, Kiba said, letting out his features, making Lee gasp and drop to the floor from the KI. Kiba-san, I'll fight you to protect Konoha, Lee said, struggling to stand up and quickly crossed his arms. I'll make your death quick, Kiba-san, Lee said as his skin began to turn red. Kiba shifted into his Inuzuka stance and waited for Lee to finish. Gate of opening. Release. Gate of healing. Release. Gate of life. Release, Lee yelled out and the ground began to shake. Kiba smirked and in a flash of speed, both fighters began their fight, which couldn't be seen to the untrained eye. Kushina and Makoto watched as the Kiri and Oto shinobi fought with most of the Konoha shinobi, the sounds and screams of all the people caught in the crossfire was filling the village, and it became evident that Konoha was in deep trouble. Well, looks like Naruto-kun is here, Kushina said, and Makoto nodded in agreement with her. It was then that the Uzumaki woman and Uchiha woman dodged two kunai that nearly hit their chests. They turned to see Hiashi Hyuga and Inoichi Yamanaka. The women smirked when they saw some entertainment. The killing of people who wouldn't put up a fight was getting dull, and they wanted to have their fun after all. Well, looks like you two have caused quite a problem. We'll deal with you two quickly, Hiashi said, activating his Byakugan. Kushina and Makoto smiled as they unhinged the rest of their features. Hiashi and Inoichi were suddenly shivering from the two, but they held fast. Hiashi looked into Kushina's chakra network, and it looked weird. Instead of being the calm flow that humans had, Kushina's was twisted, angry, and flowed violently. It wasn't a human chakra flow at all. I'm gonna enjoy ripping out your throat, Hiashi, Kushina said, cracking her knuckles. Hiashi narrowed his eyes and then was suddenly brought to a defensive stance when Kushina attacked him. She moved so damn fast that he could barely keep up with it. He only managed to block her strike due to luck that he, for an instant, saw her chakra flare, which showed she would attack. Inoichi charged at Kushina, but Makoto blocked him with a kick, making the Yamanaka head backflip. Your fights with me, Makoto said, going into her Uchiha stance. Inoichi scowled and took out a kunai. He charged at Makoto, hoping to end the fight soon, but he didn't get what he wanted. When the female Uchiha blocked it, he improvised his original plan and sent a side kick to her face. Makoto easily dodged the kick and grabbed Inoichi's leg. The blonde cursed his chances, and before long, Makoto sent a sharp kick to his stomach, making the man fly into a building. I guess I can't fully control my fox form yet. I only intended for him to hit the floor, not a building, Makoto said, but then she narrowed her eyes when she heard a yell. Die, traitor, a Chunin said, and Makoto simply sidestepped the Chunin with a quick yet bloody slash through the stomach, making the entrails spill out. The Chunin was dead. Makoto flicked the blood from her hands. She then turned to see Kushina and Hiashi in a heated taijutsu fight that was leaving the Hyuga head breathless. Hiashi was frustrated so much. His Jiyuken wasn't working at all against Kushina. He had hit multiple paralyzing and lethal chakra points, but Kushina seemed just as fine. She could still move just as fast as him, if not even faster, and she seemed to be enjoying herself. Hiashi hit one of Kushina's points again, but Kushina only grinned and punched Hiashi, making some blood roll out of his mouth. Why don't you take this fight seriously? Hiashi asked, rubbing his jaw like it had been broken into pieces. Kushina stared at him with a cold glare before replying to his question. I don't know what you're talking about, Databane. I'm completely serious here, Kushina said with a shrug of her shoulders. Hiashi gritted his teeth at her. He was huffing, and the smell of blood and burning flesh made it even harder to fight. Well, are you going to fight or aren't you? I don't have all day, Kushina returned, and Hiashi rubbed his jaw a bit more. Could you blame him? It was like getting hit by Tsunade's punch at its maximum. Hiashi struggled to his feet and got ready to fight Kushina again. Meanwhile, Naruto and Shizune entered. Konoha quickly took in the strong smell of blood in the air. The smell of the rotting corpses that littered the ground. Shizune grinned when she saw the people screaming, her blood boiling, her finger itching to draw the blood over those in her path. Shizune-chan, let's. Naruto didn't get to finish as Shizune dashed off, and before long she made someone scream as their blood splashed on her clothes. Shizune licked the blood from her hands and flicked the rest off. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. She would have it today, her revenge. The revenge of a mother who lost her child. Shizune quickly unhinged all her features, and anyone who was caught looking at her was instantly sent to the floor. Shizune's gaze leaked the furious rage inside her soul. It was like an fire that refused to be quenched until it was satisfied with destroying everything in its path. Shizune balled her fists in anger, and that anger only seemed to increase with the beginning fires that were starting to spread around Konoha. No one leaves here alive, right, Naruto-kun? Shizune asked. Naruto grinned and unhinged all his features. His ears, his tail, his eyes, claws, and height. His bangs were completely out in the open. He was no longer a 16-year-old teen, but a middle-aged man. Not a single person. Let's go, Shizune-chan, Naruto said, grabbing Shizune and vanishing in yellow lightning. It didn't take long for both to appear in front the Hokage mansion. Naruto tried to sense for Tsunade, Fu and Minato, but they weren't there. The blonde grinned and walked inside. He saw that the place was a mess. He could actually sense the secretary hiding behind the desk of the lobby. Naruto walked over to her and gave her a smile. Hey, how's it going? Naruto asked. The woman looked at Naruto and narrowed her eyes. What do you want? Get lost before you get me killed. You should be out fighting the enemy. She yelled, making the blonde cast a cold glare on her that made the woman shiver. She felt like she just made the biggest mistake of her life and Naruto was about to prove her right. What? She asked, but she didn't get an answer as Shizune walked up to her. She was incredibly pissed off at the woman and she had good reason to be. This woman was one of the main people who helped kill Kurumi and it took all of Shizune's strength in the past not to mutilate the woman when she first saw her, but now she could let loose. Shizune grabbed her by the collar and effortlessly lifted the woman up into the air. The woman gasped and gripped Shizune's hand to put her down, but the brunette Hanyu wasn't going to have any of that. No way in hell would it be that easy. Don't worry, you won. Have to think about what's going on outside anymore, Shizune said as she tightened her hold over the woman's collar. Said woman started to choke from the hold and the sounds of anguish made Shizune give an evil grin that managed to shake the woman's soul. What are you? She asked and Shizune was more than happy to answer. She brought the woman's eyes straight to hers, making the two lock into a gaze. The red eyes that Shizune had terrified the woman while Shizune talked to her. I'm the thing you've always called me. I'm a demon. Isn't that what you wanted me to be? When you say something long enough, a person will become that and I became what you wanted. Now I'm going to kill you, Shizune said and before the woman could scream for help, Shizune covered her mouth with her hand and grinned. Ah, ah, ah. No screaming. Shizune yelled and slammed the woman in the stomach with her knee. That woman felt the wind get knocked out of her and Shizune continued with more hits. Let's see how long it takes for your bones to snap from my hits. 1. Shizune said, slamming her fist into her face. 2. She continued and slammed her stomach again. By then the woman was knocked out and her bones were snapping out of place. Shizune smirked and applied some chakra to her fist this time. 3. Shizune yelled, slammed the woman to a wall. Her face was mutilated down and her body seemed to be disoriented due to Shizune's fun. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his wife while she gave a grin. I've always wanted to do that. Now then, let's go make more people scream Naruto-kun. I'm going to make them all suffer. I'll show them just who they messed with when they took Kurumi from me, Shizune said, walking out of the building. Naruto followed her, but then the two turned around and faced the mansion. They did their hand signs together and breathed some air. Kaden, Kitsune Enden Renden, fire release. Demon Fox bullet barrage, they yelled and they sent a fierce fire at the building and completely destroyed it. It immediately caught on fire and started to burn with a blazing intensity. It also seemed that the reflection of the moon brought out the true terror of the fires and made the look almost hellish. Naruto and Shizune chuckled evilly and continued to walk through the village. After 2 years of patience, Konoha will have its last night as a village. And after Konoha, it's gonna be your turn, Sasuke. I'll make your death the conclusion to it all. I'll make you scream so much that you won't be able to utter a single word. Wait for me, Sasuke. Your time is ending, fast. Naruto said as he and Shizune continued to go through with their terror. Konoha's destruction starts now.